Where is it? Where's Fleetside? And
so yes, it's Hi everybody. Fleetside. I can only imagine it's quite early in the morning. So hopefully he'll be joining us in the not too distant future. Anyway, I hopefully he's got the link. I sent it. Yes, I sent it. Both links, and he's got a presentation for us, which will be great. Now, first of all, I must ask you what your thoughts are on this year's MaM-a-Thon so far.
Hi, are you talking to me?
Yeah.
Okay. Hello, I'm Mark. Welcome.
Hello. Oh well, yes. I'm sorry. It's been such a rush coming from Jerome's channel. You'll notice I've even got the wrong name. Oh, I'll just leave it. I'll leave it to hell with that. Everybody knows who I am. And everybody knows who you are, Mark. They do, honestly. They know what you get up to when you go to Wisconsin, and that you like to visit convicted killers.
I beg your pardon.
Or supposed.
Yes, I like to visit innocent people. That's what I like to do. So
exactly.
Yeah. By the way, I should hasten to add that you've just laid yourself wide open to Eric Jose proving his theory that Captain Crunch was British, right? So
well, no, because where am I?
Oh, that's true.
And can you see who's sat on the couch over there?
Oh yeah, there he is in the corner.
Let me do that, and then you can see quite clearly. There he is, sat in the corner. Yep.
Fair enough.
Yep. So he hasn't got a leg to stand on.
No, looks like he's been stuck into the whiskey there. It's just hardly surviving. So
yes, I managed to find all his whiskey. It's a good stash here, actually.
Yep. Well, and to answer your question more specifically, I mean, as was the case last year, it is a marathon effort that's being done fantastically well by not only the hosts but also all the guests and the behind the scenes people who do all the work as well. And so the goal of keeping people informed and keeping the energy up to the pursuit of innocence not the pursuit of innocence, the pursuit of justice for Stephen and Brendan has been expounded a million times in the weekend so far, and there's still plenty of time to go. So it's wonderful. Very good. Yes.
What I particularly liked about it was the fact that, the first time round, it was, for me, it was, dare I say, it was quite relaxing. I could, as a lot of you know, I could sit here and talk easily for many hours on end, as I often do with my pupils, but I do get the fact that for some people, and even the dude himself was saying that he was getting a bit stressed leading up to MaM-a-Thon, probably nearly as stressed as he was trying to sort out his passport last year. But one can only speculate as to how much sorry,
not just his passport, just to give some context to the degree of stress.
Yes, for you as well.
Yes, we travelled on the same plane back from Los Angeles to Sydney, and on the morning of that day, whatever day that was, he still hadn't got his Australian visa.
Yeah,
and 12 hours later or 10 hours later, he's due to get on board a plane to go to Sydney, which he wouldn't have been allowed on board if he hadn't had the visa. But he came through in the end. So all's well that ends well. And
what was interesting though was that if you procrastinate over the first couple of weeks, that was the main problem. He procrastinated. It was as if he thought that everybody else was going to do it for him, and if everything was going to fall into place. Had he got his finger out from the word go.
Well, what he forgot was, of course, in order to get a passport and a visa, you have to pass a geography test, right? So, and it's a bit like a driving test. If you fail, you have to keep doing it until you get it right? So, fortunately, finally got the questions right and realized there was somewhere in the United States other than Los Angeles, California, or somewhere else in the world, I should say, other than Los Angeles, California.
Yeah.
And he managed to get his visa, so good on him. And he was, although there was never enough supply of Dr. Pepper in Australia to keep him happy,
No.
so we spent half of the journey searching the dark corners of every grocery store to find Dr. Pepper. Oh my God.
It was people think we're making this up. No, we are serious. Every single convenience store he went past, I'll just pop in and see if they've got any Dr. Pepper. He'd come out, and you could always tell whether he was successful or not, because either he'd be there 10 seconds, come out mumping and moaning, or he'd be there a couple of minutes.
Yeah, I think I could be wrong here. If you scoot yourself a little to the left or to the right there, I think hanging on your Erica's wall at the back there is a shopping bag.
Oh yes.
There it is. See the cow on the surfboard?
That's right, yeah. That's it. That's the one from.
I had to buy that bag to carry all the cans of Dr. Pepper in the first installment of about 20 cans for him at the Wyong Milk Factory with a cow on the surfboard.
So, I don't know if I can make that even bigger for you.
Yeah. So
I don't know. Does that made it bigger for you?
Yeah, it's good.
Good.
So,
okay.
There's quite a few contraptions on that back wall, monkeys and God knows what else there.
Well, you see, the thing is, the first thing he did was he put in the air conditioning.
All right.
The AC unit. But there were these pipes, and he went to a store and got extra pipes and covered them and everything and decorated them it was to try and create, now as he called it, the steampunk image. Oh, have you heard of that before? The steampunk image?
No, that's not. I don't know what that is.
Well, that's what he did. Then of course he put up his Challenger Way, his doors, and the Beatles one. So I sent him the Saltire that you see in the corner there.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
There. Yeah. So it was me that sent him that flag, you see. But ever since then, of course, loads of other people have sent him, other stuff over the years.
It's a homage to him, right? That's what it is. Yeah.
Well, absolutely, yes. But not forgetting the fact, as you say, that this is the birthplace, Southern California, the birthplace and home of Captain Crunch. So Captain Crunch is in his rightful place. He keeps on about Scottish vineyards, seriously, we don't have the weather here for vineyards. It's
the weather.
Yeah.
Mentioning the weather. Are you talking about the weather? So.
Yeah. There's that famous saying, isn't there? In the Bible, it says it rained for 40 days and 40 nights, and it was a disaster. In Scotland, we just call that summer.
Yeah.
But yes, eventually the passport. Of course, remember the other problem was trying to get a birth certificate. Can you remember? He spent ages
like Barack Obama, right?
Mm-hmm.
He had the same problem. That's the same sort of crowd he associates with, right? That elitist. Yes. Well, in fact, Mr. Obama is a highly intelligent and one of the best presidents I've known in my era of few years around on planet Earth. But that's who he circulates with, and I'm sure Donald Trump had some questions about Eric Jose's birth certificate as well. So that's probably why he had a problem. So.
Oh yes, yeah. It was. It got kind of convoluted, didn't it? It did get very. Very stressful trying to get organised. And of course, what you did was when you arrived in Sydney. Well, I arrived first, I think, by about an hour. So I went ahead, had coffee. You told me exactly where to wait for you. And then you strategically enabled yourself and the dude to appear. And then suddenly, out of nowhere, somebody else appeared that I was completely unexpectedly.
I know. It surprised me too. Happened to be on the same plane. I don't know how that happened, but he was just singing away and turned up in Sydney. So,
I know.
Yeah.
Amazing. So you said that you would like to enlighten us a little bit on your visits to Steve.
Yeah, I thought it might be interesting to the listeners and the watchers to understand a little bit. That was like less than 10 minutes, and up goes the tankard full of beer. Seriously.
What do you mean full? You call that full of beer? I do not call that full of beer. I call that virtually empty. I'm going to have to get another one very, very shortly.
Yeah. So
and this is not Dr. Pepper, folks.
Right. Well, while everyone's watching you in larger than life form.
Yeah, let's sort that out for you, shall we? let's fix that.
Oh God, you didn't have to go to the other extreme.
Yeah.
So, okay, so let me give you the story. I thought
Please,
it might be interesting to people. So I will start with a little bit of geography. So Warpon is a town, and it's about 80 miles southwest of Manitowoc. So it's in metric about 130 kilometers, and takes about an hour and a half to get there. And I do that drive down there when I go and visit Stephen. So there are set days of a week when you're allowed to visit. It's not every day. It's actually at the moment Monday. Well, nothing at the moment, but Mondays, Thursday, Friday, and either Saturday or Sunday. You can't have both, one or the other.
Wow.
And the visiting hours change a little during the week. They're typically earliest visiting hours 2:30 and finishing at 8:30, but you can't be there all that time. And then on the weekends, I think it's 9 till 3. So anyway, you go down there. All of you, most people would be aware of what Warpon looks like. It actually has 3 correctional centres in the town of Warpon. The town has a population of about 13,000 people.
Well, you know what they say about America, don't you? Incarceration nation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and seriously, on my journey down there, I passed, I think, 2 or 3 other prisons on the way down there, and the proliferation of prisons I'm sure Wisconsin's not unique in that sense, but the numbers of prisons around are phenomenal. Anyway, so Warpon holds 3 prisons. It has Warpon, the town has 3 prisons. So Stephen's actually in the prison that's called Warpon Correctional Centre, and it was built in 1859.
Wow.
And its exterior exhibits the era in which it was built. It's that very old-fashioned, historic sort of feel to it.
Yeah.
There is another big prison there called Dodge Correctional Centre.
Yeah.
And I think that's where most prisoners in the state go first when they're convicted, and they're allocated from there out to various prisons. There's a third one, the name of which escapes me. So anyway, Warpon is right in the centre of town. In fact, you drive into the town, it's like a main street, and just one block back from the main street, amid suburbia, like there are residential houses all around it. There is the Warpon Correctional Centre. It holds, I think I'm right in saying, about 1,400 prisoners there. It's a maximum security prison. And when you go in, you walk in the main gates and then walk up to the visitors centre. And when you go in there, you fill out a little form that identifies who you are, and you hand over your ID and that form to the correctional officer on the desk. They check you to make sure you're actually on the visitors list and your ID is valid. And then you're not allowed to take anything in at all. So, if I'm wearing a watch, I have to take it off. You're not supposed to take your phone into the complex at all. So that's usually left in my car. But they have lockers there that you can use to lock things away. You obviously take the locker key with you. And the only other thing you can take in is a little plastic bag with coin in it, so they can see the coins, the American coins. And there's a limited you can take some cash in notes, that is, but you must cash them into coins before you actually enter the visitors area. There's some machines to put that in. So you're not allowed to take any notes actually in the same area that the prisoners are.
Right.
Because they don't want it, surreptitiously transferred to the prisoner and used as some sort of bartering tool inside the prison.
Yes.
So, and you do need to be really careful about this, because even though you do pass through metal detectors, just like you would at an airport to go in to check you, it would be possible unintentionally to carry notes in your pocket and you don't realize them there. And the last thing you want to do is unintentionally cause a problem, and that would go against Stephen's record. And so I'm always very mindful of that I've done everything properly before I walked in there. And so you go through a metal detector. The staff there are very nice and pleasant. Go through a metal detector, you get your change that you want to, if you need to add to what you already have. And they put an identification stamp on your hand. It's like an ultraviolet thing that can be read under ultraviolet light. Mm-hmm. There's one big sliding steel door that opens, and you walk into this sort of smallish area, quite dark, and they close the door behind you. And then you show your hand where the ultraviolet stamp is on.
Yep.
To a guard that's sitting behind the desk, and he satisfies himself that you're a valid person to enter. That's what the stamp's for. Wow. And once he does it, he opens the next set of doors similar to the one you just come through, and then you're into the reception visitors room, which is like a big cafeteria, a really big cafeteria. Mm-hmm. You have a little piece of paper that has the prisoner's name on it, and obviously in this case Stephen, and you walk over to a particular podium area where there are any number of officers in that area, but there's an area where you have to go to, and you hand over the piece of paper. They assign you a table number. Every table there is numbered. They say you need to be at table 2-6 or something. And then a prisoner who's working there is given the piece of paper, and he goes over to wherever Stephen is, and it's passed. They bring him back over. So, and I don't see what goes on there, but it's usually about 15 minutes after I've been inside and I've handed over the piece of paper before Stephen comes back through. And he obviously comes back, goes through security himself to come into the center, and he has to bring that same piece of paper back to the same officer that who I gave it to. And then he says, okay, you can go and sit over there. And we'll usually give each other a big hug and bit of a chat. And we sit down and we talk about many things, things to do with his case, things to do with his family, things to do with himself. We chuckle about crazy stuff going on in the world. We talk about each of our families. We also play cards, and before you know it, the 3.5 hours has passed that I'm there.
Oh yeah.
And during that time, they have vending machines in there that you can go up with the coins and buy stuff. So whether it's drinks or food that you can heat or snacks or whatever. And Stephen, any prisoners, they're not allowed. They have to sit on a certain side of the little table. It's a low table, almost like a coffee table. They have to sit on one side of that, and they're not allowed to move. They're not allowed to get up. They have to stay in that spot. Only the visitor is allowed to move. Mm-hmm. And by the way, I'm talking like I'm the only visitor at a moment, but you can have multiple people visits in one visit. Like I was there, last time I was there was a visit that I was there with Sandra and Kayla and Mr. and Mrs. Avery. So there were 5 visitors, and all sort of surrounded in a bit of a horseshoe, and Stephen sitting on the other side. As a general rule, and I'll come back to another really important matter in a second, as a general rule, Stephen also, when he comes into the visitors room, he goes to a spot and he can order to have photographs taken, which he has to pay for. It comes out of his canteen account. And they have an inmate there who's a photographer, and at some point in the proceedings, we go and stand up and take photos, as you would have seen on many occasions in the past. But all the staff in there, the prison officers, are always very courteous and friendly and professional, and I mean, I obviously don't know what goes on the prisoner side of things, but at least
Sure.
from a visitor point of view, it's very courteous and supportive and clean and tidy and bright and cheery, as much as you can be cheery in a prison. But probably the most startling thing for me, because I've never, previous to visiting Stephen, I'd never been in an active prison before.
Right.
So, but you walk in there and you're not the only visitors and you're not the only prisoners. It's quite common to have, I don't know, when I go in, maybe 30 or so other prisoners having visitors, and they come in at different hours. So not everyone comes in at the same time.
Sure.
But when you see a young mother with two little toddlers in tow and one in their arms, walking in and wandering up to obviously Dad, who's a prisoner, and you think, oh my God, this is a world I know nothing about.
Yeah.
And how tough that must be. Obviously, hopefully the prisoners are in there in most instances for valid reasons.
Indeed.
But notwithstanding what we feel about Stephen and Brendan's case, but you think I often think, I look at these people and I think to myself, I wonder why they're in here. And they can often be in there for the smallest of offences, in my mind anyway, but nonetheless they're there, and the impact that their crime has had on their families and their wider families, you don't really want to contemplate too much. It's massive. And
yes.
Many prisoners don't get visitors at all. It's clear mathematically that must be the case, given the volume of prisoners there and the number of visitors. And I've been going there a long time, but there are any number of people who actually, and I think this is a program where people, outsiders, volunteer to visit prisoners who they may not know at first, and they become sort of companions to them in the sense of someone to talk to and so on.
Indeed.
So, but I really enjoy going there. I always feel Stephen is so engaging when you meet him. He's always got this big cheesy grin on his face. He's always asking about my side of things. So he'll say, how are the kids, Mark? What's blah, blah, blah. He's totally always focused on you as a visitor. And he's very mindful of what's going on with his case. He's extremely grateful for the support of all the supporters out there. It's very frustrating that he can't sort of, do too much to show that. And that's why we try to demonstrate that through events like this and through posting photos and a few other things that happen from time to time. But he's pretty much a model prisoner. He doesn't get into trouble. Keeps pretty much to himself. Does the right thing. And when I was talking to him earlier last week on Wednesday, we were chatting, because when he makes phone calls, he can only talk for half an hour, and it's a bit difficult at the moment because it's not easy for Stephen to get a phone because of what's going on. I said to Stephen, "What have you been up to?"
They're shared phones. It'll be
they bring a phone to them.
Yeah.
Like a portable handset, they bring them to them, and they're allowed to have it for half an hour. And there's no system for it. It's just whenever they feel like they're going to bring it to them. But just one thing, without going on too much further about this, is two things I'd like to say. Firstly, when I was speaking to Stephen on Wednesday, we were talking about all sorts of general stuff, and I said, what have you been up to lately? Have you been on any holidays? And you usually joke around about stuff like that. And he said, I've been really busy writing to supporters, replying to their letters, catching up on all my letters. And he said to me, look, I have a typewriter here. I could actually type a reply, but the fact that people write to me, I think it's more appropriate that I should handwrite a reply. It's more personal. It enables me to show them how much I care if I can write to them in my own handwriting.
Yeah.
Which is an interesting way for someone like Stephen to think. He's very, very conscious of the interpersonal aspects of who he is and his interaction with his family, with people like me, with the wider community and his supporter base. He's a very, very interesting man. And I seriously walk out of those prisons a little sad that he's still in there, but very inspired that I was fortunate enough to go and see him, and I've been able to go and see him and encourage him in and motivate him and to some degree mentor him, because I'm quite a few years older than Stephen. So, and then from there, I usually drive back to Nina, which is due north of Warpon, as opposed to straight out back to Manitowoc, because Sandra lives in Nina.
Yep.
And it's about a 40-minute drive from Warpon due north. Somewhat bizarrely, you drive straight past Oshkosh Correctional Centre in Oshkosh, which is just 10 minutes down the road from Nina. And so that's kind of a little quirky that happens. But I usually go and see Sandra just to sort of download a bit on how things went with Steve. And then from there, I head another hour due east, right across to Manitowoc, where I'm usually staying somewhere in that area there. And of course, there are many times when I'm visiting with Sandra as well, but the majority of times I'm just visiting on my own. So we have some boy time. I guess that's really the purpose of that. So anyway, I thought people might be interested to know how that works out, and so it's an absolute joy to visit Stephen. So.
Yeah, it's
hi Fleetside, by the way.
Hi Fleetside. I was going to say, Fleetside, have you ever had the pleasure of visiting anybody incarcerated? I have.
No, and I've never been in the big house myself. It's never too late, but
it's exactly. You know, I mean, that's seriously when I was heading across to Wisconsin for the rally. You know, that is an item of conversation that you sometimes have. You know, is with various people. You wonder what could possibly happen. You know, and I know that you know, somebody who shall remain nameless actually said, you know, that they'd already done a statement and a video to say that, you know, I am not at all interested in committing suicide. I am quite happy. If anything happens to me when I'm in Wisconsin, it's not, you know, me wanting to do any harm to myself.
Yeah, it's not self-induced.
Yes. No, very similar in, sorry,
What scares me about that system in the States is it's become quite a business unto itself. Oh, yeah. It's a moneymaker. And I think I remember back in the Bush era, Bush Jr., I think there was quite a privatization initiative, and even players like Dick Cheney and company bought in heavily to as an investment in what's become an incarceration business, and that's troublesome. And
it definitely is a business. Yeah. And you need customers when you have a business, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So you end up with the most incarcerated nation in the world. That's not by any fluke, I can assure you of that.
Well, how many a year? Is it 2 million?
2.2 million in prison at the moment.
It's the most
four or five times greater per head of population than Great Britain and Australia.
Yeah, I think there's only two places that are comparable, and I think it's China and Venezuela.
Below them, though, they're not comparable.
Oh no! But the next lowest, yes, yeah. But but have you ever seen that the other Netflix documentary, 13th?
Yes, that's a definite must watch for everyone. Go and watch that 13th. It's about the 13th Amendment.
Yeah.
Oh.
Ava DuVernay that did When They See Us.
So the basic premise behind that documentary is the 13th. That's the name of the documentary. Refers to the 13th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, which was the slavery amendment, and the premise behind, or the anti-slavery amendment, I should say. But the premise behind it was that the U.S. used, because that anti-slavery rules didn't apply to prisoners. Yes. So effectively, the prisoners then became the new era of slaves. Yeah. In other words, they used their labor, and they used, they would, lock up people as quickly as they can as a new mechanism for free labor, and it mathematically, so I do appreciate this, that it mathematically traces from 1970 right through to the present. how the prison population has grown just this crazy rate of incarceration under the banner of being tough on crime, right? It's just unbelievable.
That's sort of the brochure language that legitimizes what's really a profitable business for those that.
Well, I mean, no one wants to encourage criminal behavior, but there is more ways to deal with low-level crime and etc. than locking someone up. More productive and more community beneficial ways. So, you could. I don't know the numbers, but I reckon without even knowing, you could let out a third of the current prisoners. And I don't mean recalcitrants who keep reoffending. Right, they're a different class on their own. But you could let out a third of the prisoners in the US, and nothing would happen in terms of, any harm to society.
Khalif Browder was locked up for 3 years without even going to trial.
I know that. I just can't even believe that, how that can happen. So,
but no, what's rather funny while you were talking there, Mark, was that a certain Mr. Keller was trying to phone me on Messenger, whilst, of course, he knows perfectly well because he's just appeared in the chat. But what was interesting was that Chad was telling me that when he was wrongfully imprisoned, what kept him going was actually reading.
Yes.
So I'm not surprised about Steve wanting to hear about your life because it takes him away from where he is. In the same way that Chad was saying about, by reading, it gets you into this other, it takes you places that you are at the moment. It's like me when I listen to certain pieces of music.
Yeah, Ryan Ferguson referred to that too in what's his documentary called?
Dream Killer.
He said he used to read 3 books a week, and his favorite was an Ernest Hemingway one. Yeah. And it would take him to another place. He needed to escape to another place to cope with where he was. Yeah. I guess that's what Chad is talking about. Stephen does that through his correspondence with supporters, but he's also now involved in drawings and other stuff as well. So just to get his mind in another spot. So yeah.
But I do apologise, Chad. You were coming up on the chat there with probably stuff that other people thought was inappropriate. So I suspect he was trying to get in touch with me to say, why have you blocked me or something like that, or why have you got one of your admins to remove my messages? But anyway, it's interesting. Another question from Hugh there saying that I think most of us do know the fact that, because it's mentioned in the documentary, that Steve and Brendan have never seen Making a Murder 1 or 2. That no. Steve obviously received the transcript for Series 1, and probably by now he's heard all of what's going on in Series 2, because let's face it, he's in a lot of Series 2, but it does seem a bit as Hugh was saying there, it seems very mean-spirited that you're not allowed to watch, the governor has decided that they're not allowed to watch the TV program that's all about them, which is absolutely huge.
He does get to see when if there's some news item about him, like on the normal news, you will see that. But the documentary that you refer, or the documentaries plural, he doesn't get to see. Just keep in mind some other interesting aspects about being in prison, especially as long as Stephen has been in there. Like he has no application to anything like the internet or Facebook or stuff like that. They're just concepts and ideas that people have told him about. We take it for granted as a part of everyday life, and Stephen and Brendan, for that matter, have never really had any connection to those sorts of things. So when you go and visit him, it's really important to understand his frame of reference. His frame of reference to viewing what we're all viewing is a very different frame of reference. We look from the outside in, we go home to our friends, our families, our partners, we do silly things and fun things. Stevens sits in a 9 by whatever size room he's in, and he's relying on all this external stimulus to keep him informed. He has no ability to do the normal inquiry stuff that humans tend to do when they're unsure about things. So
he doesn't know he doesn't know how big a rock star he is in many ways. And the mainstream media you mentioned, I mean, they're a big non-event, and so he'd probably get very little of the impression that the rest of us have. You know, the enthusiasm of the world looking on and rallying behind him.
Yeah, and I tried. I'm sure many others do, not just me, because he has contact with many, many more people than just me, of course. But I try to keep reminding him of the level of support, whether it's through people like yourself, Fleetside, or whether it's McGilla, or it's Paul, or it's Stacey Seabrook. What's that?
Swims the sharks.
Yeah. Or Dassey Seabrook's songs, or I mean, there are too many people that I'll miss someone if I won't even try to mention them. But it's really important to enforce all those issues in Stephen's mind, because he doesn't get the benefit of seeing that or being able to filter it or to digest it in the way that we all do. So, yeah.
There was another question from Bean Green asking about, and it was a question specifically for you. So I'm gonna allow you to answer this one while I just quickly nip to recharge my glass, because I've been hard working since 8:30 this morning, because I've had to cram in a load of lessons before I set off. So you'll have to excuse me for 30 seconds.
Fleetside, do you have a violin? Can you just start playing for us? I can see a guitar. I can see a guitar over your shoulder there.
Yeah. Well, that was the other question. Are you going to play the guitar today?
Well, we could stoop that low. I do have a violin. I would hate to pull that out. Yeah, that would be very dangerous.
Yeah.
But no, the question was to do with, can Steve receive photos, as in picture cards and hand painted cards? So I'll leave that question with you for a couple of minutes. I'll just be a moment, okay?
Okay, right.
Is he limited in any way in what he can't? So what are the limitations on what someone could send him?
Okay, there are significant limitations on what you can send him. Now, I'm not professed to be the expert on this, but I'll give you my best knowledge of it. So you can send him, he can be sent photos, provided that's all they are, and that is a photo. It hasn't got anything embellished on it. It's not sprayed with perfume or sprinkled with stars. You can't send him any gifts at all. You can arrange for things to be sent to him. There are organizations, part of the system, that actually are authorized, like you can buy stuff from a catalog and have them sent to him. But you can't just put something in a package and send it to him. They'll reject it straight away. So pretty much you can, so long as you've got his name on every document and everything that you send him, and his correctional number and so on, you can send him letters, you can send him cards, you can send him photos, provided they're not embellished in any way. In other words, they don't have a bell ringing in it or a buzzer that makes you laugh or anything like that. So, and, it's best to keep it pretty simple anyway, because, it just makes it easy for Stephen to deal with them. And there's nothing worse from Stephen's point of view that someone sent him something and he never gets it because it was sent incorrectly, and therefore he doesn't even know if someone's put the effort in to be sent to him. So,
there might be a shrine back at his house. I don't know whether things go there that he can't have access to. But
I think there is a process. I've seen this with Brendan as well, where if you send him something that he's not entitled to have, then it's transferred back. I guess to his mum would be the first port of call, and he would have it back at at his mum's place. But so there is a process for that, and there's a sheer volume of stuff that they're limited to have inside their rooms or their cells, as they call them. So so at various stages, he has to package up stuff and ship it out.
Recycle it.
Well, I think most of it gets sent to family and it's stored somewhere appropriate. But there's just there's a limitation of the sheer volume that they're allowed to have. I think Stephen might get some dispensation for a little bit more than most because of the notoriety and the sheer volume of mail that he gets, which is significant. So, yeah. So. I'll answer
gonna
that
say-
for you, Mr. Capaldi.
Thank you, and thank you, Fleetside, for your work as well there. I think I kind of knew what the answer was, which was as you were saying, because clearly he's been sent certain pictures by certain females in a way to try and sort of endear themselves to him, haven't they? You know, which is
Well, I'm sure that the normal rules of in good taste would apply. I mean, I don't.
Yes.
If a supporter wanted to send a pretty photo of herself, so long as it wasn't, you know, bawdy or obscene, that would be
Yes.
okay. But
Yes.
anything that gets beyond that is going to be rejected, as far as I know. So, yeah.
Well, I know that I sent him the photographs of the magnets that I've got on the Audi. So I don't know if he received them or not.
Well, he would have if they just sent us a photo.
Yeah.
And if it had his name written on it on the back of it and his correction number, he would get them. So
excellent.
Yeah.
Good. Okay.
Yeah. So long as they're not, you know, you don't send him anything that could have something hidden in it, right? Like So if you send him some really thick cardboard fancy thing, that they're not going to allow that, you know. So they just don't want to take the risk of stuff being introduced as contraband. Nor does Stephen want that either, because that goes against him. So you don't need to put him at risk or no matter how well intended it might have been, you don't want to put him at risk on things like that.
Yeah. Now the bad news is that we better crack on, because I might have to vacate his studio because he could be coming along towards the end of the chat. So
right.
I might be relocating to, you know, before he arrives back. As in the dude, I did say that, you know, we finished my time sort of 3:00. So I did say, you know, if you can manage it towards the end, his 3:00 is
about 7 a.m., isn't it?
7 a.m. So I mean, if he's up sort of 6, I doubt it. I doubt it if he's been out howling all night long, you know. So
maybe one hairy foot out of the bed, maybe, but that'll be about it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So Fleetside, I've got all your slides up. If you want me to do them my side, or I'm quite happy for you to do them your side, whichever is easiest.
Probably on my side, because I adjusted the slides, and
yes,
I now have them focused on the truth rather than what I had sent earlier. But,
okay.
Some minor corrections. I don't know if you can share. I've got
if you click on the screen share, yes, and then I can share it.
I thought I did. Share screen. Okay, screen share. Yeah, share screen and share. Maybe Has that got it?
There we go. That's got it. Yes, spot on.
That way I can fly the desk from this end. Yeah, go ahead.
Look at that. Perfect.
Yeah.
In fact, I can make it. Well, I'll tell you, we'll keep us all there. If I'm just going to adjust my size here, because I can. If there's 3 little dots on the side of my screen that allow me to zoom in and out. And I find that very useful for just enlarging the screen somewhat. I don't know what difference it makes to people watching. I don't know if it's.
It certainly looks good from here, and we have the presentation there and 3 tremendously good-looking guys on the side. So, unless my glasses are
foggy,
could be something wrong with the lens.
You know, I went to the opticians last week, and you never guess who I bumped into. Everybody.
You do realize, Fleetside, during COVID-19, the jigsaw puzzles have been hugely popular.
Is that right? Yeah. That's right.
Yep.
We ran out of things to do, and it's gravitated to that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes, that actually Fleetside looks far better than the one that I'd got, because when mine came up, the Truth of Mine puzzle, it was all very, very condensed for some reason. I don't know what's going on. But
this is a bigger puzzle. Yeah. So did you want me to jump in and?
Oh yes, please, yes.
And by all means, Mark and Paul, jump in and at any time, and we'll sort of break it up a bit so that we can have some dialogue and challenge what's in here. But what we've been doing through a series here is modeling what's going on here. So recognizing that we don't have access to the data, and we're left with certain pieces of the puzzle, and certain pieces are missing, truthers are quite rightfully going out and trying to complete the picture to see what happened exactly to Teresa Holbach. And we know what didn't happen, and so each of us has our pet theories. And so from a modeling perspective, we've been looking at approaching it as you would in science. How would science look upon an uncertainty? And so we check our modeling technique to see whether we're sufficiently comprehensive and able to put the pieces together appropriately. What are we missing, sort of thing. So the objective of today's presentation is to continue in that trajectory, to as I refer to analyzing analyses, something I do for a living, which is sounds dull and boring, but at some point I could get into how I gravitated to that, and it had something to do with not being good at sports. So I was the guy that never got picked for the team in the schoolyard. but points to consider in solving the riddle. So we're going to answer it here today, what exactly happened, and as a tall order, and suggesting that this is not merely a wrongful conviction in the traditional sense. And so what I would persuade is that there is a larger, I use that term, engineering, an orchestration here from on high, that is part of the moral equation, and recognizing that on a legal front, we know that KZ has to follow a certain etiquette and protocol. She's very limited in, so she's got a much greater challenge than truthers who have the free and open prospect of debate and to solve this thing. And part of my theme, we've talked about micro analyses and macro analyses. So what I'm suggesting is the micro, although good and important, is not sufficient to crack the nut, which may be part of our problem in trying to isolate exactly what went on. Let's see if I can get this slide to advance. So here's the series we talked about so far. We had 6 previous series. The first one, we went through the camps. So where are the truthers focused? What is the exhaustive set of sort of the Venn diagram of possibility? Or we did it in a decision theory. What are the camps? What are the various hypotheses? What are the pet theories? And what are the foibles in those, in that brand of sort of analysis? And then in the second one, so that was March 3rd, March 14th, we got into micro versus macro. So those that are looking specifically at what happened August 31 in Manitowoc County versus those looking at the 40-year evolution, the elephant in the room, as we called it. And that was March 14th. March 17th, we got into probity and analysis, and referring to this XY diagram that I come back to every now and again, where we can analyze to advantage or we can analyze to truth, and those are two different things. The social system, the suggestion is the social system within which we are operating, the local county, the government, the courts, have a heavy skew toward analyzing to advantage versus truth. And that's where we come up with a tilt. There's a clear differential. On the 20th, we got into the justice system and declared that the House is off its foundation here, that the justice system has there are expectations that the reasonable person is part of that equation, so that the courts maintain confidence of the public. That's a meaningful part of the equation. April 5th, we talked about, called it the yellow brick road, but 7 critical points of malfeasance that led to the situation we're in today. 5 of those were in the lead up to October 31, and these are critical points, data points, in trying to model what exactly has transpired. April 8th, we looked at the quantum and the approach to payout, suggesting that this is we were suggesting there that this is quite an egregious breach of probity, and it's compounded by the fact that the earlier Bernstein situation and the wrongful incarceration there, and the system trying to dodge justice at that new Avery bill, as it was originally called. So quite an egregious misstep in my view. That was April 8th, and today we're going to further that discussion and look at some of the mind puzzles, what it is that we're focused on. So what I was going to go through, I had introduced this term parsimony before. I was going to unpack that and just address what that is. We'll look at the various hypotheses out there. So we'll return to that decision theory, and we'll look at the various camps and the likelihood of any of those exhaustive set of avenues are possible. Then I wanted to introduce that wonderful term conspiracy. I know there's quite an aversion to in the analytic community on these sorts of things, to look at the word conspiracy. I wanted to unpack that a little bit and hopefully take the edge off that, as there are conspiracies quite often, and certainly in this particular case over the 40 years. Then we do the Vulcan mind meld, trying to probe into what it is the other side has been doing and what they're causing us not to be able to determine, which is very telling unto itself. So we decipher what that information gives us. And in particular, going into the Teresa Halbach ID avoidance issue and the RAV ID avoidance issue. Why is that? Why are those puzzles so puzzling? And what does that say about what they've done here? And then we'll get into some conclusions.
Sure.
So that word parsimony, and I think, Paul, you had the parsimony in there. That actually sounds better. But parsimony has to do with argumentation where you're taking a very complex subject matter and you're looking for an elegant solution. And we'll look at some examples of where that's been used in science, and we'll look at it where it's been used in criminology, but different examples of it. But the whole idea is to take an elegant, or take all the data points, all those red flags, all those uncertainties, and try to devise an elegant solution to the puzzle. And I'll look at that from a probability perspective. We'll throw in something that our good friend Einstein had shared with us back when he was around, and look at some examples of parsimony, and then ponder the question: how large is this puzzle we're dealing with? Is it really that micro search? Does that suffice as a theory, or are you necessarily tied to a larger picture? And I think you had mentioned Chad there. This was one of his key points, and he has a stellar mind in some of this broader perspective that I certainly miss in the dialogue. But we'll try to bring that back into focus, hopefully. So the first idea when it comes to parsimony is the notion that you're looking for simpler explanations are favored, but we have to be extremely careful what we mean by that. And you'll hear the term Occam's razor or economy of explanation, but the idea is you favor simplicity. That meaning you remove superfluous details. So part of your theory, you try to remove anything that doesn't need to really be there to explain the cause and effect. A common example of this would be something is used in religious circles, the notion of a god that reaches in and controls. So if I have a baseball and I have a bat, I can calculate the energy equations and see how much energy is imparted from the bat to the ball, and I can see where that ball is going to go. So the total cause and effect is well explained within Newtonian physics. I don't need to then add to my argumentation that there would be some external master that's playing with these parameters. The Newtonian equation suffices. Thank you very much. So the parsimony rule would suggest you don't invoke those larger larger discussions. Same with Darwin, for example, when you're looking at natural selection, if that can be, if the evolution of genetic sequencing can be established based on known science, then you may not need that more complex Adam and Eve story. And you can imagine where that takes society in terms of differentiation of opinion. So you're looking for the beauty of simplicity in your explanation. In other words, that game Clue, you're looking for the Colonel Mustard had a bad day and killed somebody with a pipe. That would be a simple, compartmentalized answer with very easy to explain sort of thing. And that's where we tend to gravitate. You don't need to reach outside the rule set of the game to invoke larger considerations. But I'll come at it a different way just to see in terms of probability. So another way to explain parsimony is in terms of probability. If you think of the simpler explanations, so if somebody has a theory, you can pick any protagonist there. Bobby Dassey, for example, he was front and center for a while. Ryan Hilligus for a while. We've knocked the dust off and tested a number of theories. They can't all be right. But hopefully only one is right. But in terms of probability, if you look at the conditions that are attached to that actually operating, if the story were true that, let's say, Ryan Hilligus had a bad day and something awful happened there, that is not conditioned by very much. In other words, that's entirely possible. If you get into the more elaborate theories where, let's say, at the other end of the spectrum, the alive theories and the relocation program theories, you're bringing in a lot of conditions where the moon would have to align with the stars in such a way, and all these players would have to be able to operate in harmony to make this happen. And each of those parameters that are necessary to the outcome have a probability attached to them, whether they would operate or not. So condition A at 50%, condition B at 30%, condition B at 40%. To have all three of those line up, you're at 6%. You have a diminishing probability. So parsimony, the legitimacy behind parsimony in an argument it could be viewed that way. The conditions, it's a very unattractive solution to have elaborate explanations that don't need to be there. And then along came Einstein. So here's the problem with what I just said, and this is what I prefer to focus. So parsimony has its place for those that say, I don't like conspiracy theories, or I don't. They wouldn't do that, or how many people would have to be in on it, or somebody would snitch. These are all valid arguments. Unfortunately, the simpler theory also has to explain sufficiently what happened. And Einstein's quote here, this isn't quite what Einstein said. He's quite often quoted as having said this, and this is simpler than what he said. So, but his expression, make things as simple as possible, not simpler. So the suggestion here, on grounds of parsimony, for sure, make your argumentation as simple and elegant as is sufficient, but don't make that fatal mistake of going further in simplicity than is warranted by the circumstance. Be careful that simplicity doesn't preclude you looking at sort of larger picture operations. And in this particular circumstance, where we know we've had 40 years, this says, as we referred earlier, the 40-year malfeasance factory, you necessarily have an elaborate equation, you necessarily have conspiracy, and to ignore that and focus on the micro could be at the expense of being able to see the truth. And so reasonable inquiry, reasonable skepticism per Einstein is appropriate. So just to unpack that in terms of some examples, we know Einstein's famous equation, energy equals E equals mc squared, a wonderful, elegant simplistic equation. The equation starts actually with energy equals 1/2 mass times velocity squared, or velocity is simply speed with a vector. We'll forget the vectors, just call it speed. So 1/2 m times speed squared. Speed is distance per time. And so here Einstein's got this beautiful simplistic equation, and from Newtonian physics we had the 1/2 mv squared. The problem is the 1/2 mv squared, as simple and wonderful as it is, and we can use that in everyday life if we're engineering, whatever, it is insufficient and incomplete. And as Einstein started to realize when he's dealing with issues like the speed of light, the fundamentals of physics break down. So for example, if I had you in a car and asked you to turn your lights on, and I had a speed gun, I could measure the speed of light, 386,000 miles per second. If I then say, drive your car forward at 60 miles an hour at me, what should the speed gun register other than 386,000 miles per second plus the 60 miles an hour that the cars are going? That doesn't happen, of course. And so what Einstein realized is the speed of light is a constant regardless of the motion of the carrying vehicle, which not only underseats the elegance of that earlier equation, but it changes philosophy fundamentally. So what he started to get into is the realization that time, so in the C, the distance per time, the time component, he got into time dilation, which got him into space-time. In other words, through this little pursuit and the elegance of the equation, he undermined philosophy. Time is not a standard for all of us. It's a relative thing. It's dependent on mass. It's dependent on motion. So the elegance of the equation is wonderful, but you start to see those familiar equations breaking down in reality. Another example, putting science aside, is the Kennedy assassination. How wonderful the official narrative is that you had a lone gunman, Lee Harvey Oswald, and when the motorcade was coming around Dealey Plaza, you had this guy perched at the school book depository, and he had a Mannlicher Carcano, however I'm saying that, rifle. He had a rifle. That's what he had. And a bolt-action rifle that you recycle, and so part of just to stick to the parsimony part, the simplicity and elegance of having a lone gunman precludes you from having to look at extraneous players, that anybody else would be involved. And the minute if you did tie Lee Harvey Oswald to any other operative, in other words, to make that happen, to explain what happened in Dealey Plaza, if you had to reach beyond Lee Harvey Oswald, then instantly you have a conspiracy, and that thrusts the world down a whole different path of inquiry. And when you imagine taking out the president, and we'll talk about what the implications, what that did, it's very like the Steve Avery case. You got the official narrative, and a simple answer: Steve did it. He used the burn pit, and Brendan helped him. Very simple, satisfies the parsimony well. And the problem is, as with E equals mc squared, it defies physics. You can't burn a body in the burn pit the way it was described. It also doesn't satisfy the space-time continuum. The timeline doesn't work. So in other words, for us to latch onto that simple story, just like us latching onto Oswald in the Kennedy assassination, you have to be prepared to suspend physics. And I'll elaborate into what that is. But in a puzzle sense, it's a bit, we're sitting there with our puzzle pieces. As Mark points out, this is becoming more apropos the COVID situation, where we're running out of meaningful things to do, maybe. But you take your elaborate jigsaw puzzle and you put a few pieces together to try and get an image, and you're satisfied with it without looking at the larger design that is in the puzzle. And I think this is where we can be falling apart in some of our analyses. But the key question is how. So the question I've been trying to push is micro versus macro, just by giving them a terminology. So micro, again, in that we'll look at what micro is, and macro, the larger design. and do we have a very simple argument that there was a predator out there that did something untoward versus a grand scheme of coadjutors that set this thing up? And parsimony favors the simplicity, but you may have conspiracy theories, and we'll get into what those what I think those are. So some of the hypotheses, we'll look at the camps, the exhaustive list of possibilities in what happened here, and walk down some of the routes, and we'll look at the stature of the theory, and want to touch on the luck factor. How, so the question for analysts out there is how well their theory answers some of the bizarre luck factors that occurred here. And because we're looking for an elegant solution that fits the dots, and then we're going for simplicity. We're not looking for just simple answers. So the as we uncovered, this is the same pulled off our. I think this was presentation 1. And I'll just go to the next slide because it's a little bigger. Same thing, only bigger. So here we have the various combinations and permutations. So at the top of it, you've got Teresa Halbach.
Sure.
And then one of two things happened. She either died or she was alive. And by that, we mean October 31 or within very close proximity thereof. So she was alive or dead following that. If she died, as is posited by the official story, there was a murder. But some amongst us as analysts have posited there are other potential causes. But on the murder front, then the question is who done it? And the official narrative points to Steve Avery. We, as truthers, have successfully analyzed the impossibilities of that.
Yep.
And but nonetheless, you've got your guilters there at the far left. So on that front, given what I said about defined physics, the option to rewrite physics or to change the narrative, we're going to change the narrative. So this is an impossible, I would argue, scientifically impossible scenario that the official narrative happened. The only thing they could cling to there is if some other narrative worked, and she died at the hand of Stephen Avery some other way that we.
Yes.
But certainly in sticking to the official narrative, an impossible situation. Now, if you come down to the alternatives, some have posited that the county law enforcement were involved and that they murdered Teresa Halbach. Others have looked at Peg Lotschlager and Company, which is, as I'm pointing out in the red there, part of that macro theater, that some larger apparatus operated to murder Teresa Halbach. And then, of course, we've got our list. Another alternative is the various players. People have looked at Bobby Dassey, Ryan Hilligus, Scott Taddock, the German, Edward Wayne Edwards, and others. There'd be others. So, but on those branches, the notion that county law enforcement would do that, I find that personally, it's just my own personal, I find that absolutely incredible. And therefore impractical. But the Peg Lotschlager and Company would have the moral or the ability and means, motive, opportunity. Did they actually do that? I find that similarly very challenging to latch onto. So far we've got, in the Gilter stream, absolutely impossible due to physics. And then you've got these Truther 1 and Truther 2 that are very, I would find very impractical, highly impractical. Now, the other stream there with the Truther 3 and the various players, that becomes more practical. But what's missing in that is this thing of coincidence. It also eliminates the 40-year history, that factory of malfeasance that I've talked about. And on those bases, these are extremely unsatisfying and insufficient argumentation. In other words, unsatisfying in the sense that it doesn't treat this constellation of 7 points with sub-points around it, the 40-year pattern that we know. So I find these very unsatisfactory. Now, if you go through the other branch, some people are suggesting, well, she had an accident or suicide, died another way. Those are possible, but similarly with the truther 3, it's very unsatisfying from a goodness of fitness points. And so what I'm starting to build in the storyline is you've got guilters, absolutely physically impossible. You've got truther 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 that are very unsatisfactory explanations. So then you look at the other branch, alive. Well, how impractical is that? Can you imagine, as some have rightfully pointed out, if they were going to latch onto some grander conspiracy, first of all, a whole whack of people would have to be in on it. They'd all have to be aligned. They'd all have to be keeping the secret. And what do you do with the person herself? Should she show up someday? So this is very challenging to comprehend, as well as a plausible scenario. Now, some have within the branch. Back when we did this, there was one person here in Canada, down the road some 4,000 miles from me, but there was a theory there of a certain person, and there's others that it could be other. But the point in this is the exhaustive list of possibilities as I could fathom it, and you got one that's impossible, the official narrative, and the rest of them are extremely unattractive. And the point in that is, I don't see any one answer, and we'll get into that truther 3 and the accident and suicide, that coincidence, to try and build that argument. Why is that so unattractive? So you've got no attractive solutions, and in that sense, all explanations are fair game. So the micro are anything but what is in other words, those could be either individual protagonists or a conspiracy at a very small level, say the Manitowoc level, and the reds necessarily reach up to the greater apparatus.
Can I just
go ahead
with a quick question on that previous slide?
Okay.
It was noticeable. And yes, you can, with your mouse, you can then operate the screen. I noticed that obviously truther 1, truther 2, you've actually got, from the question mark going down, you've got the line going across County Ely, Peg, Laukenschlager and Company. So that would be truther 1 hypothesis. But could it be that it was some rogue members of law enforcement with the approval of Peg?
Right.
Is that really what we're looking at there? We're not saying all of Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department know that their officers.
So the question there is, depending on whether that individual acted of their own volition alone, is that the Lee Harvey Oswald of the Kennedy situation? If so, that would be under truther 3.
Sure.
Regardless of the motivation, it's an individual. But if on the other hand that person had the permission of or support of, aided and abetted by, then you're in truther 1. And if that reached up to Peg, Lautenschlager, and this is where Chad Keller had done some excellent work in the past, and I'm hoping at some point he steps forward and with more bravado, again, because he was quite elegantly explaining position. But so it depends how large the apparatus is, and that's the micro macro. And my persuasion is obviously, I'm not suggesting the macro wins over the micro, but I am suggesting to be very careful in foreclosing macro options. Given the consistency with the 40-year constellation of this factory of malfeasance.
I mean, the thing is that the whole thought that law enforcement could have decided that it's worth sacrificing Teresa Holbach for the benefit of avoiding what they got into. For a lot of people, that is doable when you consider Sheriff Peterson and his comment that it would be easier to kill Stephen than it would be to frame him, which means that at some point that conversation it suggests to me, unminuted, that conversation took place.
Yeah, and I think, and we're going to get into that, because if I put beside that, no, that's excellent lead in the sense that if I put that, so I find that unpalatable. That I guess I just hold law enforcement in such a high regard, or a state district attorney, and these I have them on such a pedestal, perhaps, that I just can't see that. But if I put beside that a very attractive alternative, then we start to see a weakness in the and perhaps a more plausible line of reasoning.
Sure.
Either that or I'm wrong. Yeah, go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, can I just add one little side issue that I think is fairly reliable, and that is that, and confirmed by Stephen himself, and that is in the days and even weeks leading up to the 31st of October, that it was fairly certain that he and the salvage yard were being watched from afar. So, and Stephen says that, let alone anyone else. And so if you've got that intent, for whatever the purposes of that, that would give some weight to that macro type view. So.
Yeah, and I think we've established that, right, Mark? So Steve said it, and I think we've established that to be a very reliable fact. So that doesn't prove that they conspired to murder, but it begs the question for those that are following the other paths, the truther 3, for example, or 4 or 5. It's a data point you have to answer to. You have to say, yes, they were surveilling, and yes, they were on the brink of destruction, but nothing operated there. That's the burden is on you to explain why you eliminate that data point in your answer. Scientifically, that's how we would argue it.
Yes.
Yes. So can I just also point out, just as Mark was saying there, that being watched, I have no explanation as to why Andy Coleman became such good friends with Earl Avery, going to check out car parks where his buddy Robert Herman runs a salvage yard, 10 miles down the road from MaM-a-Thon. What on earth is he doing, pretending to be friends with Earl, who is the brother of somebody who's about to end all their careers? Potentially, or at least bankrupt them. What on earth is he doing, going and being so pally with Earl Avery?
Right. So we're gonna hopefully answer that. We're gonna fly into the eye of that hurricane. That's
love it.
So if we look at,
sorry, can I just stop you?
Just
one moment. There was William, a good friend of mine from Scotland. He pointed out he's absolutely loving this because this is putting everything in there in a presentation, which I think all of us have gone through this process of what on earth is going on, and when you actually put it into slides and present it.
So all I'm doing is putting together the good work of the truthers, right? So I'm going to try to attribute to the sources as best I can, and if I've borrowed anybody's theory, that's entirely possible. The only thing I'm bringing to the equation is the analysis of analysis, how to sort of package it. Very, very minimal contribution compared to the stellar work of the truthers working night and day. So
I think we're being modest there, but we'll let you off on this occasion.
So we consider different arguments, different hypotheses, the stature of the theory. So argument 1, we're suggesting it's possible that a well-intending law enforcement had been negligent. They did their best and they got it wrong, and they nabbed the wrong guy. This is consistent with so that this is a little dashboard that I put together here. Is this consistent with known system comportment? In other words, the behavior of the system? No, it's not. It's inconsistent with all the things we just talked about and what we've seen over 40 years. Does it address the solution enablers? In other words, is it a sufficiently robust answer to where we sit today? No, it's not. Does it address the progress toward justice or the lack thereof that we're seeing, the heel dragging? No, it doesn't. It's a very dissatisfying in terms of science and an unelegant answer. So argument 2 is a little different. To say a malevolent law enforcement nabbed the wrong guy by calculation. So this goes to Mark your point of surveillance. That they knew this would by calculation. So we're suggesting here they knew damn well what they were doing and where they were engineering this thing to go. It was an entrapment. Is that consistent with the known comportment of the system? Yes, it is. Does it address the various solution enablers? In other words, is it sufficiently robust to get us to where we are today? No, it's not. Does it address the progress, the lack thereof, toward the justice system? No, it is not. So argument 1 was sort of maximal parsimony, a very low complex answer, and argument 2 is sort of a medium complexity. It's in terms of the parsimony argument, but it's unsatisfying and insufficient is the argument.
Could I just ask you about that second argument and the third point?
Okay,
if we say it's a malevolent law enforcement nabbed the wrong man by calculation, wouldn't it be fair to say that given that ill intent, that does explain the progress towards justice or the lack thereof?
In certain ways, but where I'm going with that third bullet is one would have to lean on the courts and say what is going on here. So, and we'll get into this XY diagram and whether the courts are exercising a decision of advantage or a decision of truth. It comes back to something we were talking about earlier and how these incarcerations have become a business. There's an extreme, what I call the X component, and an extreme advantage component that is in, I would argue, in the justice system writ large. The larger people operate and think to advantage as opposed to doing the right thing that's honorable and truthful, which leads to a lot of these But so it depends where we take that argument. We'll compare that to the other arguments and see if that it sort of satisfies what you're. So argument 3. This is where malevolent state DA, so that would be Peg Lautenschlager, presumably, and this is again where Chad was opining for many years, trying to cause us to have a look, and I'm hoping at some point he sheds more light on this stuff. So a malevolent state DA was complicit with malfeasance of law enforcement. So this is a much larger equation now. This is a state level DA, and they got together and engineered, as I say it, or nabbed the wrong man by calculation and entrapment. And certainly that's consistent with the comportment. That's entirely consistent with the Bernstein situation and the activities thereafter. It's consistent with the pardon that Peg Lautenschlager granted law enforcement. This is how the system does operate. Whether they did that or not is a question, but it's completely consistent with that. It addresses the solution enabler, so sufficient. It would explain sufficiently the parameters that enabled where we are today. It still doesn't address the heel dragging in the justice system. And which compares then to the fourth argument, where we're looking at a malevolent court system and state DA. That whole apparatus is complicit with LE nabbing. In other words, this would be the true business equation, Incarceration Inc., where for whatever reasons we could get into, and over the more than 1776, to 200 years of or so of evolution, that system has got to where it is, and the house is off its foundation. But it certainly explains exactly where we are. It explains the comportment. It's consistent with the comportment. It addresses sufficiently the solution enablers, and does explain the heel dragging So what I'm suggesting in there, if this is the case, the malfeasance is that quite a, the courts are not behaving with probity. If they're not exercising their foundational constitutional obligations, they are rogue. It would be the suggestion in this theory.
I'd be interested to know, it's a question that doesn't have an answer at the moment, whether there is a comparable Stephen Avery type case in Wisconsin in terms of a conviction, an application for post-conviction relief that has been so dragged out like Stevens has, whether there's anything that even compares to that.
Yeah,
and in the absence of that, if that was the case, that actually goes to the heart of that point 3, right? So,
so I would argue it's unprecedented, and others could argue this more eloquently, but in the following sense. So we know that there's a second wrongful incarceration, and that alone, I think, puts him on the storyboard alone. I don't know. There are probably instances of that, but that would be in the limelight. But the huge factor here is the second incarceration, if the theory is correct, materialized as a dodge to the Avery bill, and the greater correction that was happening. I keep calling it the Avery bill. It did change its name, but
Justice Reform Bill.
What the system quite visibly did, and we'll get into the timelines, just in the nick of time, took a step in its interest that violated probity and their obligation.
Can I just make a comment, an interesting, I think at least interesting comment, that the legislators felt enough concern about Stephen's first wrongful conviction that they were happy and enthusiastic to create a bill and name it after him, right?
Yeah,
that's quite a leap of confidence in doing things right?
Yeah,
where did that get sidetracked?
So this is Mark Gundrum, and so politically, I think what happened there is Mark Gundrum was championing what he called the Avery bill, and it's as if the political theater broke off from the interests of whoever pulled this off and enjoyed a different wave. And then, if the theory is correct, Peg Lautenschlager reached in to counter that with a device that brought a murder charge forward that then embarrassed Mark Gundrum, and then he had already signed the bill. They changed the name, and then it went on a different path. And Mark Gundrum today would, if we subjected him to this hateful presentation, he would have to admit, and he equivocates. I think he's a judge today. Where is he in there, somewhere in Wisconsin? I think he's
District 2. He's actually in the same district.
Yeah,
is a appeal court. And what was interesting was it was a couple of years ago. I did a video about Mark Gundrum and about how it was interesting how his presumption of innocence flew out the window so quickly when you see Making a Murder 1. And this so incensed his daughter, Bernadette, to get in touch with me via YouTube and sent a comment to the effect that, you're being unfair, just like everybody else in Wisconsin at the time. My dad was taken in by the same crass nonsense press conference as everybody else. And it was funny because I was traveling around at the time teaching. So I thought, right, I'll get in touch with two guys to see if they could post a reply back to her. And it was Eric Cozy and Chad that I knew would be able to reply back to her. So they did. Unfortunately, she then removed her comment, and I hadn't even had the chance to screenshot it. But for a brief moment, we were getting some thoughts from, well, obviously from I think Mark Gundrum has got at least five children, and I think Bernadette introduced herself as the eldest.
Yeah, see, that's a soft spot. So if this is correct, that would be a soft spot that you want to pick at. And you want to relentlessly, as a truther community, go after Mark Gundrum and he as an advocate. He's drafted into something. His first inclinations were correct. His desires were thwarted by a side power, and we got to get him back onto the path of truth. No more convenience.
Unfortunately, I think from what I've spoken to other people about it, when it comes to the District 2 Court of Appeals, that obviously so far, I believe it's Paul Riley, the judge that's looked at the case so far, and he's the one that's been rather condescending towards Judge Flowers. Yeah,
I'm thinking of Mark Gundrum not as the tactician, the pawn in the game, but as a human that he'd be a good spokesperson. He'll be politically controlled, isn't the right word, but he wouldn't be at liberty to speak his mind. But I sense in what he says, he has that dichotomy in his head, that cognitive dissonance. He knows damn well his first inclinations were correct, and they stand regardless of whether Stephen Avery committed the murder. They stand on their own merit. That was conveniently made to go away, which brings us to the timeline. So when we consider those truthers that are laboring in the micro theater, we start to consider the timeline here. So Stephen Avery arrested on arms charges, and it was an arms charge, on November 9th. And somebody can, if I have any of these dates incorrect, by all means, I'm shamelessly borrowing from the work of others. And if I've blame me for any inaccuracies, but certainly I've borrowed from others that did the great work. So Stephen Avery arrested on firearms November 9th. The bones arrived at the coroner November 9th. The death certificate was issued in absolutely record, unprecedented time, with foibles and uncertainties on November 10th, just in time for Kasarik's deposition to be canceled. I'm not sure, but I think the cancellation was in play November 8th, and he was to be deposed November 10th. Stephen Avery charged with murder on November 15th. Dennis Vogel was to be deposed November 15th. And oddly enough, Teresa Halbach's remains were supposedly confirmed. Put that in parentheses. January 19th. But no need, because you've already got the death certificate issued back on the 10th, just in the nick of time. So look at the precision, and we'll burrow further into that. The precision of how the system luckily avoided what would have been a hateful course had it gone the other way. But just before we go there, I wanted to touch on our favorite word, conspiracy, and try to defuse. There's, in the mind of most people, if you talk about competing theories, my sense is people don't like competing theories. It's only human nature that you want to lock to what you think is right, and you want to defend that because that's your belief system that allows you to navigate life, and there's a good reason for that. But in the spirit of science, you always have any hypothesis you have, whether it's E equals mc squared or the other energy, in any equation in science is falsifiable. We hold it as a hypothesis unless and until we have a better explanation, and we certainly stand out of its way and lend ourselves to the alternative theory. So you have more than one plate spinning on a stick. You don't lock it to one. But a friendly example of conspiracy that I think we admit to is the stock market. So we know that the stock market plays an important role in the economy within which we reside. We know that in the stock market, you have a lot of individuals that trade wealth. There are winners, there are losers. The stock market doesn't create money. It simply moves those who benefit to those who don't. And we know that large groups do this, and they don't have their hand fanned out on the table when they're doing it. This is clandestine operations, and it's legit, and we know about it, and it's proper, and that's conspiracy. And it affects your lives every day. That's a very simple commercial example of known conspiracy. So the point in that is simply that conspiracy is nothing to be afraid of, other than, so it is legitimate on parsimony grounds that we talked about, to favor the simpler over the more complex. But to wander through life and say, I don't allow myself to consider conspiracy theories, puts an unnatural blinding on your analytic lens. And we'll get into why the public retort is programmed, it's pre-programmed, predisposed to not liking conspiracy theories. So the Kennedy assassination, coming back to our friend JFK. So I was in kindergarten when this happened. I was born in '58, and home from kindergarten, and the mailman came to our door. I had morning kindergarten, and I was trying to peer around my mother, and there was this guy very excited at the mailbox saying that our president was shot. And I was thinking, well, that's not good. And so we went to the TV, and we watched all this. And then we further watched on the Sunday morning when Oswald was killed by Ruby. So that was a Friday afternoon for the November 22nd, 1963, Friday afternoon, around 12:30 Dallas time, which would put an hour different. Now, I was only 5, but I didn't realize it wasn't our president, and that sort of went over my head. And to add to tragedy upon tragedy, cartoons were canceled on Saturday. So this left quite a scar in my mind, that's never gone away. And following the Kennedy assassination, the lone gunman theory had come into quite a opposition publicly. So there's quite a bit of debate. And don't forget, there was no internet, there was no access to information. They had closed the files. Very reminiscent of a circumstance in Manitowoc where you close off access to any information and you make these very simple declarations that Oswald from the 6th floor, without any aid from anyone, no conspiracy. So the conspiratorial thinkers were unseating public sentiment, and we understand the CIA had put forward a program to notch in our minds this whole anti-conspiracy theory thing, that those thinking of a larger picture are loose-minded, tinfoil hat-wearing silly people. The bitter reality is the simple narrative, so the parsimony that would lead you to Oswald as the lone gunman, conflicts with the known reality. So we know, for example, the time window in there to recycle that Mannlicher Cactano, almost got it that time, within the timing that he would have had, and the precision of the shots. That's one thing, but to explain the damage. So we know, as many years later, the Zapruder film and the Kennedy's body going back and to the right. We know the gray matter sprayed over the trunk of the Lincoln. It also hit that. There's a police. You can almost see the motorcycle cop sprayed his windshield. So physics tells you where the bullet was coming from. You've also got damage within the limousine, like the window frame was hit. The railway passing that they were about to come up to was hit. Some of the concrete broke out and injured somebody standing there. There was shrapnel over the lawn. So in other words, this very attractive lone gunman theory, where they could only allow for 3 shots to explain the window, this required Arlene Specter to join the Warren Commission and create what we know today as the magic bullet theory. And so the Warren Commission stepped outside the bounds of physics. Very similar to the Stephen Avery burn pit scenario. We have to step outside the bounds of physics. So you had to explain the damage to Connolly, who's sitting there in front of Kennedy, et cetera. So we're not here to talk about Kennedy so much, but just the notion that conspiracy, it would be extremely remote scientifically rationalize Oswald as the lone gunman, and yet that's where mainstream media to this very day continues to go, and they're not allowed to work outside that box.
Can I just ask you a question? Back in relation, it relates to where we are now in these slides, but it was to an earlier slide about the situation, the timeline of the depositions. This question's been asked many times before without a satisfactory answer, at least in my mind, and that is, why was it necessary to stop the depositions, notwithstanding what had gone on? Because that was a separate matter altogether, notwithstanding the notoriety of Stephen and the alleged, second crime that he's allegedly committed. Why would that give his lawyers an out to stop that process?
Yeah, and it ought not to have, but from a political perspective. So I think so the question stands. It's a legitimate question, and everybody should be, and that's what I mean by there was legitimacy regardless of what happened to Teresa Halbach. There's legitimacy in the Avery bill and the depositions and where that was going, whether or not Stephen Avery was a monster that acted. So your question is a good one and stands. And
Stephen was a private citizen being represented by private lawyers.
Yeah.
In a civil case. Where did those private lawyers get a view? This is a question that doesn't need an answer. But where did those private lawyers get a view that it was in Stephen's interest to stop that process?
Right. So that's another good question, and again, Chad, for example, would provide an answer to that, where those lawyers are tied to certain political interests. You can't, in other words,
hence my connection to the conspiracy concept, right?
Yeah, that's right. You can't pull the politics out of the scenario. Unfortunately, they're not to be political. But what the resolve with which your defense counsel moves forward can make a difference. So this is where I think Stephen started with the ineffective counsel argument. Were they managing his interests, or was there a greater advantage they had in mind?
Yeah, were they managing the reputation of the innocent project rather than that of their client?
Yeah, and again, Chad has some excellent, but we could delve off into that and explain a number of advantages that a defense counsel would have that would be a conflict of interest against the sole obligation to represent the client.
Yes, exactly.
The professional calling. Yeah.
Sorry, no, I would suggest that that Steve's lawyers, having seen what had just happened to their client, they were keen to get out of there as quick as possible. Now, there's a bit of parsimony for you.
Yeah, plus they have another life to live.
Yes.
And that gets into the conflict of interest, which may or may not. But that solicitor-client privilege and the obligation to represent the client is a perfection, an ideal that one has to work very hard to maintain as a purist objective. And so the question's a good one, and it stands. Yeah. Did that operate to ethically, or and that's the XY diagram, did it scream off on the path of advantage? And I would suggest there's a good argument to suggest that it did. In other words, Avery didn't receive the defense he was entitled to in law.
And it imputed guilt when he was at that point still an innocent man.
Yeah, if you can undermine his own counsel. In Chikansky, for example, a much greater visibility into some strange paradise there. And behavior. Now, any lawyer, anytime, even through we put KZ on a pedestal and think the world of her. You would always want to keep a critical eye as to, where are the interests being served and how well are they balanced. It's just a human reality. Not trying to cast any dispersions against our goddess KZ. But if you look at, there have been a number of conspiracies through my lifetime. Sorry, I set that up wrong. There have been a lot of major events through my time, and each one of these have been posited by some as a conspiracy. But certainly the JFK assassination, then that was 1964, you had the Gulf of Tonkin, where the U.S. was apparently shot at by the Vietnamese. You had 9/11, 19 hijackers from a cave in Afghanistan thwarted the security apparatus of the U.S. and committed an atrocity. You've got terrorism and the war on terror brought to you by this syndicate called ISIS. You've got climate change that's generated by humans. You have COVID-19 that's a product of nature. And as a matter of social etiquette, and for good reasons, that in that XY diagram, for reasons of advantage to society as a whole, the etiquette suggests those answers to the right. And that's it, that's all. We're not allowed to debate at liberty other ideas. Now this, and I could, if this were about any of those items, I could go back and give you the top three. Now, I mentioned in science keeping more than one plate spinning on a stick. For any one of those explanations, you would want to not reduce it to one, but to say, what are the top three or four competing theories on what could have happened here? And you keep those plates spinning on sticks, or in other words, you keep that on your storyboard as you navigate forward, and then you decide, I have to make a call. I'm going to go with this one as my working hypothesis, Oswald, okay, if that's where you want to go, even though it defies physics, but who am I to? So then you say, okay, you wander down that road, but you always have those alternative theories there, which is a lesson learned, I think, for the truthers in our Stephen Avery case. The official narrative, it will always be on our storyboard, as we've said many times, but similar to Oswald, once you get to the point where you've defied physics, I know how I would characterize that data point. It doesn't take it off the storyboard. Gulf of Tonkin, incidentally. So if you look at what's the implication of JFK having been assassinated at that time, he had signed Executive Order 011111, which was to pull troops out of Vietnam. Johnson, I believe the day before, had a premonition to sign a counter order to that executive order. And so the death of Kennedy changed the fortunes of the Vietnam War. And the Gulf of Tonkin was the pretext to up and accelerate. Now, the Gulf of Tonkin incident, as McNamara had publicly stated, was a false flag. That didn't happen. The administration lied, and that was admitted. Now, the rest of them, we could get on into, but my point in here is there's a social etiquette, and if you look at the social etiquette in Manitowoc, or if you look at where the mainstream media is going, thou shalt not wander from the official story is kind of where we're stuck. You're not getting accurate reporting, and you're not getting the groundswell of objective analysts within the community.
Yeah.
The truthers are unfortunately in it alone. So this is our XY diagram that I keep referring to.
Interesting, Fleetside. Most of the truthers would happily engage the guilters and bring them in, but they don't come in with any ammunition. So
and part of it, and remember back in the early days, back when we were young, when the truthers would engage a little bit, like is it what's the site that one of the sites there anyway? We would engage, but you got this tactical psychobabble back from the other side, and the supposition was soon that somebody had hired operatives to just clutter the internet with meaningless. It wasn't meaningful dialogue.
No.
But we, to this day, and I think Paul's put the invitation out there for any truther that wants to walk into the lion's den, that we'd be very cordial and I like to think
guilty, hater. I don't. I've welcomed them all, and and it's they have nothing to offer. I was I used to engage in them to begin with. And I'm sure that for a lot of us, we remember with a certain fondness a guilter from north of the border, from Canada, called Thomas Hens. And for some of us that are very long in the tooth, and he was, he presented, the idea that he could see that Brendan was completely innocent. He thought it was abhorrent, the way he was treated. And as far as he was concerned, Steve was completely guilty and was trying to continually say, well, it is possible to burn those cremains in the fire pit. And he used the tires to help as the propellant, and that, he kept it well ventilated. And he broke up the bones with the screwdriver and this, that, and the other. And it's like, well, Thomas, tell me this, son. If you are so confident in your theory that Stephen is guilty, you could make yourself, at the time, $10,000 better off by simply, rather than contacting me, I'm doing you a favor, contact Kathleen Zellner, present all your evidence to her and see what she says. Yeah. And guess what? I don't think Kathleen Zellner ever got a message off Thomas Hens.
Yeah, or put it to a competent and objective is the key word, scientist, laboratory, that sort of thing. So when I say it defies physics, there's no way the energy equations wouldn't work, first of all. But it's a wonderful story, and it's designed to keep Oswald as the lone gunman. And interestingly enough, he couldn't be the lone gunman because they needed Brendan, who was going to spoil the narrative, right? So then they had to entrap him to maintain this. He was collateral damage to their wonderful narrative. So you can imagine in science through history, this idea of falsifiability. I was going to go into Galileo or Copernicus before that, and Galileo and Darwin in the 1800s. But this idea that changing, whatever the conventional wisdom was, they were ostracized for their community for outing what later became the self-evident truth. But
yes, it's always funny how Ken Kratz went under the handle of Charles Darwin for quite a while. It was, look, even Ken Kratz has got his moments when he can present something quite entertaining, almost. It's
entertaining. And if we lived in a land of Incarceration Inc. that we were talking about earlier, then that x-axis that we have there is what it's all about, and that's where society, in a tactical sense, gains its advantage. The truth can be very disconcerting, and if the truth about Oswald were outed, that would require quite a purging of the system that we know was exercising malfeasance there. In the long term, that would have been probably good for society. So it's a short-term tactical advantage on the x-axis. Let's keep the lid on this thing. It's much more convenient. Let's keep our pensions where they are. Let's avoid lawsuits. Yes. But it's sacrificed at the expense of the truth, which eventually, as Stephen Avery had quite eloquently put, will come out. Right?
Yeah. And I do apologize if I have to keep shifting in and out. I'm getting a lot of activity behind the chats in Messenger with Mr. Keller, who who is here listening. One thing I've always wondered about is that with this, I get the fact that the people on the other side, like the state, yes, they could have, very much so, have manufactured all this. To be honest, Chad, I find it very difficult to believe that, just because Jerry Buting knew Peg Lautenschlager as a member of her committee, I am struggling to see where Jerry Buting and Steve Drizzen were in on it. We saw how quickly, as Walt Kelly and Steve Glynn, how they abandoned ship. but for me, I hats off to Jerry and Steve Drizzen. I think they've kept at it. Yes, they've had the platform of making a murderer, but
so let me not that sure. I want to go too far down that road. Here's how science would come at that.
Yes,
you put both on the storyboard, right? You put all your competing. You're not afraid of anything. So the emotional epitaph that somebody wouldn't do that has to bear out in the evidence and reasonable conjecture. And given that you have other lawyers that you're citing that were co-opted, it would be a reasonable prospect to study. No offense for Stranger Buting or KZ or any of the Laura Nyrider, etc. Steve Drizzen. No offense to anybody there. And forgetting this case completely, it would be normal to put that on the storyboard and let your mind. So you simultaneously hold those, and you may quite rightfully say, "I'm having faith." So this word "faith" is a hateful idea in scientific terms, but I have faith in that because that's the way I'm going to navigate, and that's fine. That doesn't render Chad's perspective, assuming that was he had the counter position. That doesn't make that wrong. You just have, story. And as we navigate forward, Stephen Avery says the truth will come out. So the idea is to keep more than one plate spinning on a stick. Yes. Never close to one. This is a bit where, when I said the etiquette around each of those life-changing events down to COVID that I had on that earlier slide. As an etiquette, and this is the unfortunate thing that I'm trying to fight before I run out of runway in life, is the notion that analytically we close to one. We feel compelled to have one. We don't enjoy the cognitive dissonance in having more than one opportunity, but that's what science is. That's science forever. That's what makes scientists crazy. That's why they're no fun at cocktail parties. They're busy. They're appallingly dull and boring individuals. But
they could be worse. They could be financial advisors,
and they can't play football because their mind's focused on competing theories of something else. Certainly, that would be my excuse.
Anyway, I'm going to
you wouldn't want me on your football team, but we're going to get into some more interesting stuff. Hopefully, here the Vulcan mind meld, and addressing the question: what are they working hard to suppress, and what does that tell us? What if we dusted their strategy for prints? What can we glean from that? And we'll look at who benefited in the stuff. So there's our friend. So we're going to do the Vulcan mind meld on the states. We'll call it the systems position. So there's certain things that they don't want us to have, and one thing they don't want us to be able to do is to identify Teresa Halbach. And I would argue this from the following points. There's obviously the withhold of evidence that the system is by design intentionally to make transparent. So by hook or by crook, they are withholding evidence. They've done highly targeted testing of, say, RAV and other components, narrowed in on affirming Stephen Avery in their little narrative, and very little collateral testing that would have been interesting to have. The bones were destroyed. In other words, the evidentiary the record was destroyed. They were given back to the family, and that happened after Making a Murderer started. So Making a Murderer was probably about 6 years into filming. But it was post-appeal. Upon the appeal, it seemed, under this theory, that would be a good time to get rid of that evidence, because MaM is not going away, and you've at least hit the threshold of the appeal. And contrary to the Avery bill, let's get rid of this stuff. There was the unnatural diminishing of the quarry evidence. So,
Can I?
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. It raises an interesting point. There is that if they had just gotten rid of the bones and not handed them back to the family, what the implication of that would have been relative to giving them back to the family, because it in some way implies that the family were waiting to receive them.
Yeah, to me, so that is an interesting. That is a very interesting question. And it opens a side gate of intrigue on those that, and I'll get into that. The Holbach family.
Okay.
We know that there are certain theories there, but I think for this particular slide, it suffices to say that they. Once the chain of custody is broken, then they're not reliable and they can't be used. So whether they give it back to the family for this argument, whether they give it back to the family or whether they just did whatever, threw them out, whatever, it destroys it. It renders them not that evidence not available for future Avery Bill type second guessing.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm gonna open that door again in a coming slide. So unnaturally diminishing the quarry evidence. I don't want to spend, what did he say, 30 seconds on. The coroner denied access. I mean, talk about a surreal environment. Can you imagine? Not only was she denied access, but threatened. I mean, what on earth is going on? We know that there are a lot of date typos. It seems that nobody can get the dates straight and on the records. You'll notice that there's very limited planted material, right? So we're clinging to very little evidence in terms of the fire pit. We also know that Sherry Culhane had consumed in extra testing some of the samples. So unfortunately, whoopsie, there's nothing left. We think she sneezed on a sample. I don't quite know how the DNA got. I'm being a little facetious there, but she transferred her own DNA, spoiled the tests. And then no photos of the burn pit. I mean, really? Destruction of burn pit itself. Let's get in this Bobcat and let's take out the vicinity.
Sorry, Fleetside, just going back to the Sherry Culhane point.
Yeah.
I think my take on that originally was that the amount of DNA on that bullet of Teresa's was so small. I mean, I believe nowadays that the scientists can get a DNA profile off a smaller sample. It's something like stupid, like sort of 27 cells. But the sample size to begin with was so small. No wonder she couldn't sort of duplicate the.
Yeah, she tried to what do they call it? Use to augment the sample. I've forgotten the term.
Yeah.
And then of course the chain of custody is vague on some of which we're going to get into some of these, but the collection here paints a picture they don't want you to identify.
Yeah, but as far as the photos of the burn pit, I find it incredible that neither Jason Jost was apparently the guy that originally said, "Oh, there's these cremains." And then Tom Sturdivant says, "Oh, there's these cremains." And then John Myrtle comes along and says, "Well, there's these cremains and they're in a big pile." So no photographs taken?
Yeah. So it defies logic. Sometimes the absence of evidence is evidence, which is sort of where we're going. What is it they don't want you to know? We're sort of looking at this backwards.
Unless there were photographs taken and they are still in Tom Fassbender's private collection.
Yeah, or in the trunk of his car.
Yes. I mean,
where we keep all the evidence.
Well, I mean, in that Innocence Files case, one of the detectives had kept stuff in the garage, and I thought, my goodness, it's not just in Wisconsin that police officers do this.
Well, it's as if they want to be careful what they bring forward, and they don't want to be accused of destroying. So there's this trunk of the car theory. Where they can hold stuff and they'll pull it in and out of evidence as required to maintain their narrative.
Anyway, when it comes to stuff in trunks of car, we won't mention the trip to Sydney.
So I'm gonna fly into the eye of the hurricane too on this RAV, and I know that's
go for it. Now, I only wish that what's his name?
Hillbilly.
No.
Oh, from Australia?
No. What's his name? You remember in the film the Man on the Moon?
Yeah, Jim
Yes.
Carrey. Yeah.
Yes, Jim Carrey plays Andy Kaufman.
Yeah.
What's Andy Kaufman's alter ego? Tony.
Oh, yeah, I know who you mean. I was going to say Tony Esposito, but I say hockey. Tony, yeah, I know who you mean.
Tony Clifton. Tony Clifton
Okay.
is Richard Boyd's double.
Yeah,
Now,
funny.
now, if you don't know who I'm on about, check out. Obviously, Andy Kaufman, famous for what? Taxi.
Yeah, originally, yeah.
Well, Andy Kaufman, obviously, yeah. Well, he did a lot of things, didn't he? He was a real wind-up merchant, But yes, obviously famous in Taxi, and obviously Jim Carrey played him. And there's even a Netflix documentary about Jim Carrey playing Andy Kaufman. Anyway, we are totally digressing.
He did a better Andy Kaufman than Andy Kaufman. So the second point here is they don't want you to identify the RAV, which has us all bent in a frazzle. Is there one RAV? Is there two RAVs? Are there multi-RAVs? We know that Herman had the ability to supply and etc. We know there was damage to the RAV noted before. We noted damage that wasn't explained to the front end during. And so, and again, and consistent with science, keeping more than one theory on the table, my suggestion is they don't want you to identify the RAV. And the notion of closing to one RAV or two RAVs, I don't understand the merit in having to answer that. I would have both on the storyboard, and I would move on to other things. I would not suggest anybody be forced to take one of those theories off the storyboard. But you can see in the case of the RAV, first of all, there was the tampered VIN, there was the suppressed eyewitness accounts of where it was cited before, uncharacteristic blurred VIN photo, suppression of the Cuss Road escapade. So that's one of the citing points. Sorry, that wasn't the site. That was. So we don't know what happened at Cuss Road, but some circus happened apparently, and it wasn't relevant to what was happening here, but certainly garnered a lot of attention. We know the news feed represented a different vehicle than we experienced in the photos at the auto salvage, and we noticed the changing of testimony. And the notion where Kratz was leading the witness to make what would have been a green RAV blue.
Yeah.
And I'm going to show you some color samples. We're really getting into tricky territory in some of the truther discussions. So point 3, it appears that the victim's family did not look for Teresa Halbach. And this is a very sensitive area because our preconception here is predilection is to honor the family and understandably, but in the interest of science, you got to go where you got to go. So that they weren't really looking for Teresa Halbach, and they don't want to today gain any further understanding. Thank you very much.
Yes.
No one came to the RAV. No one continued to search for a human post Pam of God, right? So it's a missing person.
Correct.
And this is, we talked the other day, wild horses couldn't pull me away.
Yeah, exactly.
No one cares today. They do not want. So the point, I mean, that's an interesting point when it comes to trying to triangulate what the answer is here. So then we get into the wheel of fortune. Who benefited? Did the county benefit? Did Tom Kasarik or Dennis Vogel benefit? And given that their pensions were on the line, the derailment of the depositions, was there any estate planning or insurance activities going on? I think we know there were some timely events there. Any changes in fortune for some of the storytellers? So Scott Tadish, Mike Halbach. Teresa Halbach herself, we don't know. And in keeping with the Wheel of Fortune theme.
Can I have a go at that?
You like to buy a vowel. So I wanted to zero in on the Teresa Halbach avoidance, identity avoidance issue. Look at some anomalies, some alternative explanations, and the look for the weak link in the chain. So here's the timelining. So Teresa Halbach missing presumably October 31, 2005. She's reported missing November 3rd. I think that was the first instance. It was the telephone call from her mother to dispatch. Carmen autopsy was November 4th. This is Carmen Bootwell. So talk about lightning striking twice in the same place. You've got 2 deaths almost concurrently, and same age, female, same age, etc. That was November, where her autopsy was November 4th. The RAV was found on November 5th by Pam of God and Company. Bones found in the burn pit November 5th, same day. Carmen Bootwell was cremated November 8th. So interestingly, her autopsy was November 4th. Cremated on the 8th. Yeah.
Is that date the finding of the bones in the burn pit correct?
I don't know. Let's.
Might be.
I'm sure it was the 8th.
Yeah, I think you had it in an earlier slide. I think that
was when they were handed over, wasn't it?
So I'm gonna expand on these, but let's flag that if I don't have that right. Yeah, let's flag that for attention.
I think it was Tuesday the 8th. They were found Tuesday, sort of 1 o'clock-ish.
So if that's the case, that would coincide more accurately with where Carmen Bootwell was cremated. Right?
Yeah.
Coincidence. These are coincidences within coincidences.
Yes.
And then Stephen Avery arrested on the arms charge November 9th.
Yes.
So all they had was firearms, and arguably to your earlier question, Mark, about what caused this thing to be derailed. I don't know that an arms charge would have sufficed. A conjecture on an arms. So certainly, in order to derail these depositions, you needed something earth-shattering to cause those winds of political change to polarize differently and just in the nick of time. So the bones.
It goes to the heart of whether his civil lawyers were, as you say, protecting their reputation or that of their organizations above their legal obligation to Stephen as a client.
Yeah, well, some have hypothesized in the truther community that they had an undue influence for other advantages in terms of personal positioning and in personal rallying behind certain policies. So everyone, unfortunately, in science, everyone, including you and I and Paul, are possibly guilty.
Yes,
I'm guilty. I admit.
We know, Paul. This is just a slow and circuitous route to get to you. This is. You'll get to see the final slide. Paul did it. So the bones arrive at the coroner November 9th. Eisenberg received Teresa Halbach's November 10th for testing. Death certificate issued just like that, November 10th. Tom Kasarik deposition canceled. Was to be deposed November 10th. Perfect timing. Now Christine Rudy murder happened November 11th. Stephen Avery charged with murder November 15th. So that upped the gravity from the arms charge. And then Dennis Vogel was to be deposed on November 15th, if I have that correct.
Yeah.
Fassbender picks up the Teresa Halbach exemplar. It's hard to say when this was. Now, and a shout out to the foul play team. Some of this I've borrowed from what they had published, and I didn't see attribution to an individual. Otherwise, I would say that. So whether it was a team effort or whether there's a name that's missing here. So some of this is a theory that came from there, and certainly shout out to that team. And I wish I could identify the individuals, and as a follow-up, somebody could, by all means, feed that in. So the Teresa Hall is go ahead. Sorry.
Fleetside, were you saying Fassbender picked up the exemplar picked up from where?
From the the pap smear, if I understand correctly.
Oh, okay.
So
Okay.
yeah.
Sorry.
It's a little sketchy, and so this sketchiness is part of the intrigue, the uncertainty. There should be clear documentation of who held in custody that evidence at what time and who was carrying it. So there's these vague, which adds to the intrigue.
Okay.
Wisconsin State Crime Lab had the exemplar November 23rd. The Christine Rudy exemplar they had December 2nd, same place. So these samples were concurrently held at Wisconsin State Crime Lab. Teresa Hallbox remains officially confirmed January 19th. So you can imagine you've already issued the death certificate. You've indicated that there was an autopsy, and yet, there's all kinds of questions about that exhilaration.
Can I ask one of those all kinds of questions? On what was the possible motive for issuing the death certificate so instantaneously? What were they trying to achieve by that? It could have been issued on January 19th if that was the date officially confirmed.
Yeah. So the theory, one answer there would be that the all they had Stephen on was the gun charge, and they needed to have, for those political winds to change, they had to have a murder, not a weapons charge, and so regardless of when they actually accused him of murder, the intrigue was there. The system was polarized. You needed a larger story. Yeah.
Okay. Yep. Okay.
The weapons charge would have been too lightweight, and those depositions would have moved forward. Had those depositions moved forward, there'd be incredible damage, and they will move forward in another light if and when we prevail.
Yeah. Okay. I get that. Yep.
So expanding our little diagram, so the alive or dead theory, and trying to incorporate the Carmen Bootwell hypothesis. There's the prospect that given that they don't want us to be able to identify Teresa Hallbox, could be that she's alive, or could be that she died. If she's alive, they could have or not used Carmen Bootwell. Which begs the question: did Carmen Bootwell die as reported? As there's something more sinister there, but that sort of left-leaning branch. So again, we're just putting down the art of the possible without voting. And don't forget, I find all of these paths equally repulsive, which leaves me with nothing. Right. I put the exhaustive list of all opportunities down there, and they're all repulsive paths. So therefore, everything's fair game.
Could I just ask then if we've got suspicion over Carmen Bootwell's demise, does that then also mean that we should share that same suspicion over if something caused, because apparently she died of a methadone overdose, which is quite bizarre, is it not?
Well, it's bizarre in the sense that although she had some history with the law, and I don't know that you would call it a substance abuse problem. I think it was somewhat uncharacteristic. It's possible. But even with methadone, you can subscribe, so to speak. I mean, it's you can still orchestrate. It doesn't make it an act of nature necessarily.
Yeah, no, it's just that if law enforcement, Manitowoc Sheriff's Department, were capable of doing that to Carmen Bootwell, they're equally capable of doing it to Teresa Hallbox.
Yeah, just the Hallbox were part of an inner circle in the community.
Right.
So, so the leftward branch would suggest an engineered disappearance.
So one, as in Carmen Boutwell, is a well-known addict who is dispensable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So again, I'm not accusing anybody of anything here. This is science, and we're just putting down the different, different possibilities so that we have an exhaustive list. So died as reported or murdered as a plan, which would be a larger conspiracy, or if she, died. If Teresa died, and for some reason the Carmen Boutwell evidence became important for reasons that we don't yet understand. So it could be that it's a framing conspiracy, or it could be a much greater, sinister thing. We don't know. But we'll put that on the storyboard just as we move into some of the alternative hypotheses. So I put foul play down there with some of the credit here is tremendous work, and I wish I could identify the individuals. But
you're not on about that awful Dr. Silkman fellow, are you?
Well, I'm gonna mention Dr. Silkman in a minute. He's a wonderful, it could be
another Sandpaper Gate supporter.
No, I think the world of his, and I'll get into what.
We love our Aussies. Honestly, Mark, Dr. Silkman.
Water off a duck's back from you, Capaldi.
I know.
We treat all Aussies equally, right?
Well, we said
everyone else.
we sent them there many years ago.
Yeah. Well, that's a different presentation. I'll have to come back on that.
Excuse me one moment.
So some of the alternative hypotheses that Carmen Boutwell was used to secure the Stephen Avery arrest prior to Tom Kaceric's deadline, that they needed something more than a weapons charge, and something was concocted using evidence that they had at that time with Carmen Boutwell. It could be that Christine Rudy could be used. Now she died. I think if I understand, her partner, her husband, had done something untoward. It was a coincidental accident. But whether her evidence was in any way used to bolster the conviction. In other words, some of the DNA we may be wanting to test could be from someone else, and that would tie back to this theme of the only reason these are reasonably within the storyboard is this lack of the ability to identify Teresa Halbach's DNA. You wouldn't need then Teresa's DNA at all for if you could orchestrate things to use a different example.
Yes.
And so Carmen Boutwell's death, November 3rd. The bones in the Steve Avery burn pit found. So I got November 5th. What did I say?
I think it's 7th.
Okay. So one day after the CB autopsy. So we got to check those dates. Yeah. But just to follow a hypothetical line of reasoning, then, and we'll check the dates to see whether this adds up. But you're looking at the Carmen Boutwell autopsy, you're certainly within the window to have bones available, although the cremation didn't happen until the 9th. But Stephen Avery was convicted on that gun possession November 9th, one day after the cremation of Carmen Boutwell. The death certificate of Teresa Halbach issued the 10th, same day as the Eisenberg tested the bones, one day after the CB cremation. There's, it's an interesting thread to tug at, as some truthers are doing.
Yep.
So Tom Kaceric's deposition derailed. I think the decision, I think the decision was on the 8th, which coincided with Carmen Boutwell's bones being available, which allow you to upgrade that charge. The Christine Rudy murder November 11th. Her remains were tested in the FBI November 15th. Stephen Avery charge upgraded to murder November 15th. Now, coincidental with Christine Rudy's bones available doesn't mean anything other than these are striking coincidences. And this is the sum of hypothesis hypothesize. So this is the call this one the Dr. Silkman slide, and I'll try to do justice to what he in addition to being an all-around good fellow and being a stellar Australian, his partnership is extremely important, because the Innocence Project and its motives and intent largely turn on DNA. It was the advancement of DNA and science that were the engine for that. So DNA is king, sort of thing, in these discussions. And as he points out, the alleles, you do a 7 loci test. If I understand correctly, that leaves a 1 in a billion chance that your sample and your exemplar would be of different people. And now some have pointed out that the standard has changed. I don't know whether it's now 9 or 19. I can't remember. The system has upped the number, but I'm okay with 1 in a billion. For the sake of reasonable debate, unless this was tighter engineering of a relative, and then I might want to talk. But I'm okay with the 1 billion. So science certainly, I think, confirms the correlation between the sample and the exemplar. But a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. And the problem is not in the science of testing. It's in the administration of getting the right exemplar to the test and getting the right sample to the test.
Yes.
And especially when you have questions on authenticity of the RAV, authenticity of samples, the chain of custody is appallingly terrible. And on the exemplar side, the chain of custody, again, this vagueness with Mr. Fassbender. So to proclaim that there is a match turns on the sample and the exemplar. So the integrity of those is required to complete the chain and say, yes, that's Teresa Halbach. That confirms the death of Teresa Halbach. I mean, that alone would be a good topic for a presentation. But my takeaway is, yes, the science is extremely sufficiently precise with the 1 in a billion for me, and the question mark is on if there's room for manipulation in that equation. It's in the sample and the exemplar.
Yes.
Yep.
So the RAV avoidance issue. What the hell is going on with this? And we know that when we open this, there are some tremendous. I could cite some of the people that did some tremendous work. The truthers are very lucky to have a whole raft of detail on this RAV. So in a timeline sense, here's what happened. Pam of God, I've got at 10:30. I don't know, it was 10 o'clock, 10:30, somewhere in there. November 3rd, she finds the RAV. Now, those colors that we see there, those are the actual colors. What I did there is simply grab in PowerPoint, the, what do you call it, the eyedropper. And I used a sample from a deep jewel green RAV off the internet, and I used a sample off the Mystic Teal mica off the internet. And so those are just computer generated. That's the difference in color. But that's not the most significant thing. The more significant is that reference to it changed magically at a time. I think the Pam of God vision must have been coupled to a lightning bolt that somehow polarized the paint, and the world is pre-POG talking about a green RAV and post-POG talking about a blue RAV, and that's odd. The VIN number's odd, right? So of all the photos and the importance of having that accurate, now we think we know what that is, but of all the things to have tampered with and coupled to a lack of a quality photo. I mean, who's operating the camera here? This is supposed to be edited. Here's your favorite subject. I believe so. We're really walking into the storm here. The RAV up above is the deep jewel green. That was off the, I think, Wisconsin News report. I think that's where I grabbed that from. And then you've got the middle one is the Mystic Teal mica. That's the the one on the Avery salvage yard photo, and the one below is the one that Ms. Zellner has, which is the royal blue, sapphire blue, or whatever it's called. So you'll notice, first of all, on hers, it's almost blue to violet sort of thing. The green is very green, and this particular RAV that they showed has the color key panels, right? So the wrap, the plastic wrapping. In the lower end models of the RAV, they would have all been gray, like you see in the middle and lower. And in the high end model, you could get them color keyed, which is where your door handles match your body, as Richard Boyd quite often talks about. And so rightly or wrongly, what was represented before in the posters and on the news and through explanation is that upper vehicle. What we came to see is in the middle, and those are the color differences. So those ones, what I did is I grabbed off the internet those examples, and you'll see they're in different shades of light. So, but those are the three colors. Now, this photo is very important because this ties, I don't know if there are any other photos out there that tie Teresa Halbach to the notion of a blue RAV pre-POG, right? Pre-PAM of, in the pre-PAM of God era. I think there's only the one. This was Tom, who was her boss there?
Tom, yes, the boss.
I think he took the photo, yeah. So you'll notice it's the same photo, only different. So the first one I grabbed off the official trailer to MaM-2, I think it was, and ran that through and then stopped it at the RAV, and that's what you get. And that's very clearly the Mystic Teal mica, so I just took the picture from before, put it, so it's, you know, very, and I had a Pontiac Montana back then, and it was in that color. I thought it was actually ugly, and I bought it anyway. But but I would never call it a green. If I had to describe it to, it's definitely a blue car. If you went to mix that on a color palette, I do believe what you would do is take a blue and introduce a bit of green, very little, to give it that sort of mystic teal, as they explain here. But what's significant here is there's a picture floating around on the internet, which is on the right side. So it's the same, only different. And what somebody's done here is without affecting the background and or the ground, or without affecting Teresa, they've masked the and I could do this too at home. Masked the a region which appears to include the cladded panels, right? The gray cladded panels, and they've color shifted that to favor green, which comes up very proximate to what you're seeing below it, the deep jewel green, which is borrowed from the internet, a separate sample. So they got a very close likeness, but it's the blue RAV for some reason. Somebody's either introduced evidence that's corrupt, or they're having us on. I mean, it's hard to say what the motivation, but these are different pictures. Some have further posited that the Teresa's too large for the picture. I mean, we could, you check shadows and that sort of thing, but somebody reasonable in Photoshop could put her in or out. It's hard to say, but as far as I know, that's the only photo we have that ties her to the notion of a blue RAV. And again, it opens up these doors of intrigue about color accuracy. So reasonable alternative hypotheses, you know, as some have. So again, in the name of science, you're looking at exhaustive possibilities as opposed to whether you like these or not. So the DA, law enforcement, and the family have been complicit in at least misrepresenting the RAV pre-POG. Right, so they've all talked about a green RAV, uncharacteristically so and consistently so, and representing it so on posters and to news and for whatever reason. And the family is aware of that. DA is aware of it. Law enforcement's aware of it. Another alternative is that the DA, law enforcement, the family have been complicit in misrepresenting the RAV as being Teresa's post-POG. But out of those two possibilities, either way, you've got the DA, Ellie, and the family that need to explain why there's an incoherence at a marked point on description of that RAV. And it has fueled speculation for some that we're reviewing Plan B, to which there was a Plan A. You know, we're seeing the vestiges of something that is an incomplete picture to us. So, for example, Cuss Road did whatever she owned before get burned, and that was to have been, you know, who knows? The mind can go down all kinds of paths. But it suffices to say that the family, law enforcement, and the DA are complicit in an incoherence. So at least there's some corruption there.
And of course, you know, to affirm that, there is very notable resistance from the prosecution or the Attorney General to release the RAV to Zellner. So,
that's right. I don't think they can. It would be tantamount to having those depositions move forward. They will with all, and Zellner's already foreshadowed that, you know, they'll fight it to their last dime. That would be failure on that part. If that RAV ever got out, they're ruined. And so whether an accident or you can't put a RAV in the trunk of somebody's car, but you can have an accident, you know, whoopsie, there's a fire, or we gave it to charity out of some other good, you know, that has to be gone. My suggestion.
Well, yes, there is the theory that the vehicle that knocked down Ricky Hochstetler is buried somewhere in Cleveland, salvage yard.
So Ricky, so if you look at the, as I say, the 40-year factory of malfeasance, Ricky's a data point.
Exactly.
We could find that Carmen Bootwell's a data point. There are others. So once you open this can of worms, which is why that RAV has to be gone, this plane either keeps plane of corruption either keeps moving forward in the air, or it falls out of air and do tremendous damage to the pocketbook of individuals that will be named, and to, as we explained in earlier video, potential for reasonable, twice the tax in any particular year.
Yes.
So some conclusions. The event, to me, the event is likely engineered at senior levels. That doesn't mean the event being the death, but you're necessarily looking through a broader lens, as I think Chad has advised and cautioned. But I would support and agree that you're definitely looking at a larger picture here, and publicizing the alternative theories can help. Making our position known and getting it out there. Compiling in the spirit of putting out things publicly, what's the truth or information that, if we could take all our theories and boil it down to these crunchy pieces of information we are looking for. We're trying to affirm this, and this, and we all have a storybook in common, and you publicize that, then you start to make a public statement. Right now, the other side enjoys the benefit that we're all over the map. So this would be a concentrated sort of message if somehow we could at least get to the same page to identify information that we need to make a call, to disposition what happened. DNA is key. So Dr. Silkman again, basis for the innocence program determinations, but again with the extreme caution that chain of custody, the weak link is in the potential that, like the other data points we've dealt with, that information could have been manipulated, and to keep more than one plate spinning on a stick. So here we've got plates spinning on a stick. I did this in my living room, and it took me the first one. So obviously not the case, but the plea in science is that you keep more than one theory, don't lock to one. And I would argue in this particular case, given that all paths are equally repulsive, keep that storyboard and see which ones resonate as time goes on and as you reflect on what's happened here and look at means, motive, opportunity, cui bono, etc. Resist the temptation to close doors or collapse to one theory. So there's nothing in the analytic rule book that says, oh, come on, guys, this has to be the answer. Oh, come on doesn't exist in the analytic framework. And help a friend. So we have, and there's times, I would suggest some of the people that we've ostracized, somehow it's very unfortunate that emotions got entangled in there and things got to sort of a very sensitive state. But it could very well be, if you're taking flack, maybe you're over the target. So just to bear in mind, we're all of equal minds and equal vote, if you put it that way. All insights and independent thoughts are good, and the idea of helping each other. If somebody's theory, they need certain information, rather than trying to change their theory to conform, let's share the information they need and try to work with them to either let themselves come to another conclusion.
I think there's also the possibility that not as overt as this, but there are layers of theories that could interact with each other. In other words, there could be sub-elements of theories that are relevant and other parts not. It comes back to this question of when you often hear people say, how could something so bizarre as this just be achieved without so many people knowing? Well, my view is that there is at least 3 or 4 layers of, let's call it, bad behavior here that could be independently achieved without it being a total strategy. So
and so then you look at the coincidence of those lining up and the imperative that the disposition that the depositions be, so there's a very precise hit on those depositions. So those various things that you would suggest would have to coincidentally line up to enable the precision of that hit. That's a lightning strike of epic precision, I would argue. But you're right, and the difference between conspiracy to murder and conspiracy to frame, those are 2 different things.
Yes, exactly.
But here's where I think this ends. Someday we'll be looking back on this thing, and there'll be a new bill, and it'll be called the Avery Anti-Bill Avoidance Bill, which would suggest that the county should think twice before it tries to subvert a bill that's passed by others. Just some meaningless dribble at the end. You must always be willing to truly consider evidence that contradicts your beliefs and admit the possibility that you may be wrong. Always good advice to scientists. Intelligence.
To everyone.
Yeah, and intelligence isn't knowing everything; it's the ability to challenge everything you know. So yeah, that's it in a nutshell.
Matt, can I ask a quick question, please? Fleetside. This you've sent me all these slides. I've particularly enjoyed putting together slides with a bit of music. Would it be possible to put these slides together with a little bit of music and share them?
Oh yeah. Are you going to play? Is this going to be? So the answer is that depends. Is this going to be the squeeze bar?
I was well. Do you know?
You should play. You should play it. Yeah.
Well, I've done a couple of them, but to be honest, my favourite is some bits of classical music, something like Carmina Burana by Karl Orff.
Yeah.
Something.
That's definitely, and I've got a guy who can do that at my end, or you're the, I think the kingpin musician. So whatever you want to do there, by all means, we can explore putting these together and other slides from others.
Yes. I think from both ends. If I put one together, put it on my channel, and on the new Fleetside YouTube channel, we have it your end as well, and we'll mark you down as one of next year's hosts. Okay.
How did that happen?
Did you not read the contract I sent you?
Yeah, no, I missed that part.
You missed that. Listen, guys. First of all, Mark, thank you very much for coming in and joining us.
My pleasure. I do actually have something a little else I want to say, but not just at this second. So
okay. And to Mr. Fleetside, it's been absolutely fantastic having you come and join us for these presentations, and hopefully we'll have a little bit more to discuss once we get the state's response.
Absolutely, that's going to be fascinating. Yeah. And thanks both, Mark and Paul for hosting me, and for having this
absolutely fascinating. I was captured by everything you were saying. It was very, very good. Thank you.
Let's put it like that. Let's go for that.
Okay.
So, Mark, have you got something you wanted to?
Yes, I have two things. One's more meatier than the second, and I have to duck away for 30 seconds to talk about the second, perhaps right at the very end. The first thing I wanted to speak about was to do with, so it's a little left field, but I'm sure it applies to what we've just heard from Fleetside, and that is the question of jury tampering. And in recent times, I've actually undertaken an exercise personally to give validation or not to the proposition or the supposition that there was jury tampering. So I think it's important to understand something in regard to the issue of whether people think Jerome Buting and Dean Strang did a good job or not, is to remember this really simple, basic fact, and that is, at the conclusion of Stephen's trial and the jury retired, we know, validated by more than one person, that the jury had a whip around and to get their opinions, and 7 of those 12 jurors said not guilty.
Yeah.
2 were undecided and 3 said guilty. Now, if I'm a criminal defense lawyer in the circumstances that we find ourselves in, or they found themselves in that particular trial, to on the first run of consideration, to come up with 7 not guilties is a pretty good result, I would have thought. More alarming, however, is how do you turn, in the absence of any new evidence, because they're already in deliberation, how do you turn 7 not guilties into 12 guilties? Mm-hmm. Now, so I took it upon myself to actually speak to some jurors, and they confirmed this, which I'm happy to tell you, and I think I may have mentioned it once before, and that is, they told me that when they were deliberating the evidence, that there were 3 jurors in particular, including the foreman of the jury, who wouldn't debate anything at all and maintain the view that Stephen was guilty no matter what, and in fact put to them that if you don't believe Stephen Avery committed this crime, then you're saying that your local police force committed the crime, which was a presumption of total inaccuracy because no one was saying that. But that's what they said to them. And with the added item of saying, and good luck in this town if you're making that accusation. And over the course of a few days of deliberation, through fear, through coercion,
intimidation,
through the presence of the Calumet sheriff in venues where the jury were and he should never have been, that they are intimidated into changing their mind. Yeah. And the not guilty verdict on the mutilation of a corpse was a compromise given to get the final juror over the line on the guilty charge. And so I think it's really important to keep that in mind. I'm 100% certain that that's exactly what happened. I'm hearing it directly from the horses' mouths. And so when we go back to analysing the case, and whilst Buting and Strang could have done other things, as we all know in hindsight, we think we could do other things. Given what they did do, whether it was adequate or should have been more, they did end up with 7 not guilties to start with. So then if you go to the conspiracy type issues or the improper behaviour or the macro view and then say, well, there were macro plays in place here that totally subverted what was the justice process. And so, the behavior or the success or the competency of Buting and Strang was going to be always subject to that macro influence from others. So I just thought I would mention that.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, isn't it? So Mark, I'll let you come in a moment. When we had our chat with Rob Bellin, and he was making it quite clear that, yes, Dean Strang and Jerry Buting are big name lawyers in Wisconsin. They were back then. They're much bigger names now. It is bizarre how Glynn and Kelly kind of abandoned their pursuit and settled in for just 400,000. It's just bizarre. But yeah, I've yet to really come across any real evidence that in any way Strang or Buting were sort of complicit in this this huge event. But anyway, Fleetside, I'll let you.
Yeah, just to add to that, you go ahead, Mark. Yeah.
No, I'm just going to quickly duck away because I want to grab something to mention my other point. I'll be 30 seconds.
Okay, excellent. I mean, to me, that comes down to this notion that the solicitor-client relationship is an ideal, and the notion that a lawyer with all their faculties, all their resources, are to solely represent their client's interests is an ideal. And there are many lawyers that work very hard to that ideal, but life is not perfect. There are these lawyers do eke out career paths that are commingled. There are other relationships that become important, and so all that to say, there's political winds behind this thing that one would always be mindful of, and no one, including me, can be objective and perfect. I try to proclaim that I am an objective analyst. Well, I'm as human as everyone else, and so every one of those is falsifiable. Just whether it has legs or not, whether it's a sufficient point to dwell on, is a good question. Yeah. As you probe into PEG, and this is where Chad, I think, would go, as you probe into, which I think is well worth doing, the PEG Lautenschlager orientation on this file, and who did she touch, and how did she touch them, and how does that relate to the circumstance they were in, and how does that bear against justice?
But as been rightly pointed out on many occasions, the information that was given to PEG Lautenschlager never included the phone call from the Gregory Allen phone call to Andy Colbert.
Yeah. So, but I think so. We can cite individual data points, but there seems to be the factory of malfeasance, in my sense, reaches there.
Mark, what have you got for us? Australian t-shirt, excellent.
Yeah, thank you. I already had that on, Paul. Good observation.
By the way, my first pupil this morning is a doctor. I said, rather than injecting or ingesting disinfectant, surely alcohol has the same cleaning effect.
Yeah.
Because, as the dude has quite rightly pointed out on more than one occasion, 40% blood protects you from COVID. This esteemed doctor from Edinburgh concurred with me. He said, yes, as much whiskey as you can. So I'm only following doctor's orders. I do apologize.
Oh, God. Okay, so my last little 2 cents worth, it doesn't have to be the last what we're talking about, but is I always like to bring a human element into discussions like this. And you'll recall yesterday I talked about Alan Avery. One of the benefits of traveling to Wisconsin on so many occasions, you get to meet everyone, which is an honor and enjoyable. And one of the young men I have met is a fine young man is Blaine Dassey, Brendan's next brother up the line. And Blaine took it upon himself without direct contact from me to contact me and just to say, hello, Mark, how are you? And blah, 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 blah. Anyway, we struck up a little sort of chat, and I've met him a few times, and he made me this sign, which is what I wanted to show you. And there's a big message here, as well as the fact that, oops, let me get it in the right direction.
Yeah, perfect. Hold on a sec, Mark. Let me just highlight you. Then it makes it so much easier to.
Yeah. So, I mean, this saying is quite famous for all of us, of course, but and it means a lot. It means a lot in terms of what we're trying to do here, but you know, Blaine made that he apart from his normal full-time job, he has a business in, you know, like a little hobby business producing custom timber and other things. Yeah. So I just wanted to mention that, not so much to promote Blaine's business, but to promote the reality of the humanity associated with this matter. And here he has a brother in prison now for 13 years and trying to get on with life as best he can. And he's wholly behind all his other family members in support of Brendan, and he's a fine young example of an everyday citizen who lives in that part of Wisconsin.
Well, gentlemen, we've just about come to the end, and we're going to hand over to Sharon Sunshine. There's been some, I don't know if you've managed to follow much of the chat. Fleetside, you've been far too busy. I followed the chat, and also I've been getting constant messages on my phone. Can I just say it's very much a case of, I think every single person's opinion needs to be heard.
Yep.
Even myself, I have tried desperately to get Guilters to come on and present their point of view, their reasoning, etc. And certainly from the point of view of the truther community, we might not all agree on everything, but surely we're all headed in the right direction. You know, it's
mutually respectful and helping. And there are, if you did have a Guilter on, the way to frame that would be through the Queensbury rules of fine debating, right? So here's one hypothesis, here's another hypothesis, here's the argumentation, here's the sufficiency, I mean, you can have a structured, and it would require a neutral, I don't know where you would find that, a neutral intermediary. But you could have a structured debate.
I'm in Scotland. I'm quite happy to be neutral on all of this.
I know a judge who could step in, Paul, and help out.
Oh, Wilfox, Judge Wilfox.
Wilfox.
The legendary Judge Wilfox. Yes. What happened to him, Eddie? That's what I want to know.
He's now on the Supreme Court. You know, he's already gone way up.
He's gone way up. Yes. Listen, Mr. Fleetside, thank you so much, and I look forward to having you on again in the not too distant future.
Yeah, thanks, folks.
Likewise, Mr. Hoddinot. Likewise to the lovely Tracy Keogh yesterday for coming and joining us, and of course the wonderful Rule Griffin, who I think, and the dude can correct me on that, I think that the dude has got Rule Griffin on later on along with McGillis, so don't worry. Okay. We've still got a bit further to go till MaM-a-Thon is finished, but as far as we're concerned, I think that's us. We can sit back and relax now and let the main team take it on.
What do you mean the main team? Come on. I'm going to take that garbage. Come on, Mr. Canada. You and me are not going to take that from a...
Yeah. Well, Australia stands with Canada on this.
Absolutely.
And vice versa.
Okay, guys. And to everybody, and I mean everybody in the chat, thank you for joining in. Thank you so much for joining in. Everybody's opinion is appreciated, and that's the way it should be. So if you two gentlemen could say cheerio from...
Yeah, it's goodbye from him.
And it's goodbye from him.
And it's goodbye from them. Bye-bye.
All the best. Bye-bye.